Sam Kahn works and writes for theathletic.com. He'll join us, in fact, right now on Sikkim 365 Radio and 365 Sports. Sam with Craig and Paul and David Smoke. Sam, let me ask you this. Why is it so difficult for conferences to just sit in a room and agree on how many conference games they play, how many FCS games they should play or not? Why is that so hard to do?
Everybody's got their own agenda. And when you've got 14 teams in a conference and everybody's got different agendas, it is hard to come to consensus. So, I guess not. I say 14 teams. It's about to be 16 when Texas and Oklahoma join. So that's another tentacle to add to this. So, I mean, what fits and what works for Alabama maybe doesn't work for Vanderbilt, or what works for Kentucky maybe doesn't work for Texas A&M. So I think that's a big part of the issue. And just generally, whenever you get that many people in the room, I think it's very hard to come to consensus on anything. It might be hard to come to a consensus on what to eat for lunch, much less what kind of scheduling setup we're going to have.
Sam, when it comes to the 3-6 model, which I would assume is probably what they're going to ultimately go with because it makes the most sense, is maybe part of the argument is there are some teams that are going to feel a little slighted because they don't get the exact best three that, say, somebody else might get?
I think that's a part of it, but I think that's a smaller part of it than the fact that you're actually going to 9 conference games. I think the 9 conference games versus 8 conference games is more of a sticking point, in particularly for the Vanderbilts of the world, for the Kentuckys of the world. Maybe Kentucky's a bad example because they've been very good lately, but maybe the Missouris of the world. Because that extra conference game is an SEC game, which means it's probably going to be tougher than what you've scheduled out of conference. And then that makes it tougher to make it to bowl eligibility, which obviously affects, bonuses for coaches' contracts, which affects payouts, from the conference via the bowls. So I think that's probably more of a sticking point than the 3-6. I think, yes, definitely it's impossible to make everybody happy with a 3 permanent you get because there are some schools that maybe have more than 3 rivals that they like to play on a regular basis. And there are some that probably don't have enough to make 3. And then it makes for awkward pairings in that instance. But I think the 9 conference versus the 8 conference game is probably more of a sticking point. But I agree with you that at the end of the day, I think that's what we're going to end up with because I think that fits most of the programs better. And I think it's a better system to get more teams playing each other more frequently as opposed to now where you have Texas A&M who has played Georgia once in the 10, 11 years they've been in the conference. It's a better way to get that fixed while still preserving some of the rivalries that are very important to the conference.
Sam, what have you made of the way that ever since that ruling was passed, the conference championship game setups have just changed up? I mean, the Big 12's just stayed pat, but they still got to figure out what they're going to do in the future with the revolving of teams and all that. But what have you thought about the pretty much quick response by everybody to say, all right, we're doing away with divisions?
Yeah, not surprised at all. And I think it's just sample size. We've seen what it can do to a conference when it comes to the postseason, when it comes to the playoff, is if you get a disadvantageous matchup in the conference championship game, you can end up sending your best team home rather than getting them into the playoffs. And so, obviously, the Big 12, had its own setup and system to work with. But I think more and more the idea of having a team that can get in the playoff, play a team that's got nothing to lose, that has no shot in the playoff, is just not a good situation if you're the SEC, if you're anybody else. And so I think it's natural. And it took time to figure that out because the conference championship setup seemed sensible when you expand these conferences so large, 12 or 14 team setup and putting them in division just made mathematical sense. It made scheduling sense. But now that we've experienced it so many times, I think it makes sense to move away from that just because of how wide-ranging these conferences have become. And ultimately, the bottom line is you want your conference champion to actually be the best team in that conference that year. And getting away from a division setup, I think, allows that to happen.
Sam, as you know, a year ago at Big 12 Media Days in mid to late July in Arlington, everything seemed to be nice. Everyone was playing nice. And then a week or so later, of course, all hell broke loose. How much would your career, where would you be now? And you're already at a hell of a place in theathletic.com or whoever, if Brent Zerneman could have been in that Big 12 Media Days and asked the question about the move during the press conference.
That would have been wild. I know he said it. I talked to him not long after all that happened. After all that broke, and he told me about the face that Greg Sankey gave him when he asked the question, and it was very much an exasperated, like, oh my gosh, like, what do you know kind of look. And so I think that would have been it would have been wild to see that play out publicly as opposed to privately one-on-one, which is the way Brent did it, which is honestly, if I were Brent, I would have done it the same way. I would have done it by myself rather than in front of everybody else. But I tell you, it has changed everything. And it's funny you say that Big 12 Media Days. Gosh, that seems like 3 years ago. And it was not even a full calendar year since that happened. And it was funny. I'll never forget how kumbaya it felt, after talking to Bowlesby about all the issues and what was ahead of the conference. And it seemed like everything was very calm. And then a week later, it just all was thrown into upheaval. And boy, I feel like we've been going, spinning the hamster wheel ever since, and then going like 90 miles an hour since then. And I don't think it's really stopped because we went from that to NIL being debuted and breaking all hell breaking loose in that. And you've got, obviously the season, and then, you've got the tentacles of what happened with the Big 12. Obviously, what happened to the SEC with them taking Texas and Oklahoma affected the Big 12, it affected the Conference USA, affected the American, trickle down. We're all the way trickling down to the FCS. You still have FCS moves happening at this point. So it has been a very, very long time, and it has been a very intense time. But for me as a reporter, and I'm sure for the college football fans, it's been a very entertaining time, and certainly I can say for us, it certainly has been good for business.
Sam Kahn, theathletic.com, with us on Sikkim 365 Radio. And of course, isn't it interesting now the governance meetings are going on right now. Texas and Oklahoma are a part of those, but the other four teams are in as well. Which among the four, and Cincinnati had a great year last year, Houston was good too, UCF, we know what they've done, and then Brigham Young is solid. Which of those four do you think might flourish better when the conference starts with them next year?
I mean, it's clear Cincinnati's probably in the best spot at this moment, just because they came off the playoff and locking up Luke Fickell to a new contract, and the recruiting that they've done, they've recruited at a really, really good level. I mean, look at what they did in the NFL draft. I mean, that's some impressive evaluation, impressive development that they've done. So you've got to think they're in a really good situation coming in. But I think long term, to me, Houston, I think, is the team with the highest ceiling of them all. Just because I think the institutional want to that they have been very aggressive for the last decade plus when it comes to facilities, when it comes to spending, when it becomes trying to act like a Power 5 program. Now that you're going to give them the status of the conference that they've been competing with the Baylor and the TCUs and the Texas Techs for recruits. This gives them a little bit of a boost in terms of trying to keep some of those recruits, those Houston area recruits that so many schools have come in and taken. And I think they did a really good job of closing the 22 class. They seem to be doing a good job in the transfer portal. And obviously coming off that 12-2 season, and Dana Holgorsen got himself a new contract. They seem to be spending really aggressively on staff. They're working on getting an ops building put together. They're raising money for that right now to get their own football standalone ops building. So I think when you look at all the desire to succeed from them and compared with the stability they have from a presidential standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, I think their ceiling is really high long term.
Sam, Jimbo and Saban, not quite the, I guess, spectacle that people were hoping for at SEC spring meetings. It's been more fizzle than sizzle. Is that fair to say? Yeah,
and to be quite honest with you, I'm okay with that. I think I had my fill of that back and forth. I mean, it was entertaining in the moment, certainly, and I will promise you I have never seen an impromptu press conference quite like the one that Jimbo Fisher called that Thursday morning after Nick Saban said what he said in front of his fans and boosters and whatnot. But I think it's going to stay quiet. I think we're going to see this be relatively calm, probably until game week when they meet on October 8th, and it'll start to heat up again, building up to the actual game when they play each other in Tuscaloosa. And that'll be fascinating in its own right. But I think it's going to be pretty quiet for now, unless one of them all of a sudden gets a spicy feeling and decides to start it up again. I think after Sankey, talked to him and they had meetings at SEC spring meetings, I think we'll probably won't hear much about it from here until October 8th.
I think my favorite part was A&M going and grabbing Alabama grabbing the A&M quarterback commit days after complaining about NIL. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, it's been tough. And it's been, hey, it was a godsend for us in May. For us that create college football content.
Absolutely.
It's very much kicked up some interest at a time when there usually isn't much going on.
Yeah, I kind of hope Mack Brown and Dabo Sweeney get in a fight. I don't know. I mean, that'd be something we could talk about.
Those are two of the nicest guys all time.
One of the nicest.
Yeah.
No, okay. The other one's kind of fiery now in Dabo. But Sam, they had the topic of the SEC versus all y'all playoff was brought out and on the table. While I think most of us know that would never really work and there's no way to wrap your head around why the other conferences would agree to it, how do you think the other conferences kind of react to that? Because to me, it seems like a bit of a political stunt on the SEC's part, and it would be foolish for any of the other conferences to panic react to that just floating out there.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to react hastily to that because I think it is, people understand it's more of a threat than or more of a talking point. Like you said, political stunt is a good way to put it than it is reality. But I think it's Greg Sankey trying to put people on notice that he's going to do what's best for his conference. He's going to look out for his conference because he was part of that working group that put together that 12-team proposal that I think it's fair to say that when it came out, most college football fans seemed to be on board with it. And they squandered that opportunity because there was a group of conferences that were missed that, the SEC was taking Texas and OU and seemed to retaliate. And so I guess the alliance, the three conference group that formed the alliance would be the primary group that pretty much try to shut it down. And so I think Greg's point is that the SEC is going to be fine regardless of playoff format. If it's 4, the SEC will be fine, as we see. If it's 12, the SEC is going to be fine. Whatever they decide to do, they'll be fine. And so they're operating from a position of strength. And I think that was just Sankey's way of saying that, is that, look, if you guys don't want to play ball with us, we can take our ball and go home, so to speak. I don't think it's something that they'll actually do, but I think it's more of kind of a warning to folks like, hey, let's everybody get back on board and let's start going back towards what we thought and what's for the good of the game. The playoff format that they put together last summer that I thought was perfectly fine was for the good of the game, for the bigger picture. It was not just good for the SEC, it was good for everybody. And I think that's part of the message, like, hey, let's get back to that. And I couldn't agree more, to be quite honest with you. I wish we would get back to the 12-team format.
Sam, go stir something up so we can have a Jimbo Saban in the Big 12 in July. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time as always. Great stuff.
Thanks so much, guys. Y'all have a good one.
Sam Kahn Jr., theathletic.com. We have Sam on, Max on. We've had others, of Andy Staples, among others, do a great job. Seth Emerson, I think, at some point late next week. Appreciate him. Brett McMurphy will join us as well coming up at 4 o'clock today. There's a lot of great questions. And there is, for example, SS77. If high schools can play 17 potential games, the NFL can maybe play 21. Why is college football stuck at 15? It used to be stuck at 11 or 12. And it was always, we've got this academic schedule here, which is a bunch of crock of
But it was fine for basketball teams for
to
a
play
month.
35 or 40 games. Yeah.
But it's not even that. For a month,
they're
traveling for a month.
Yep.
I mean, there's no home games once you start March. March 4th, their home games are over, and you're in a conference tournament. You're in the NCAA tournament. So I know basketball teams have less players, but they figured out a way to do their classes on the road back in the 80s. So it's not like it's internet-based now. In the 80s, they had a way for them to travel.
Imagine where we'd be if there was the days of old when you played a regular season and some schools won a national title even if they lost their bowl game.
Yeah, that'd be
because
tough.
One of the national championship polls did not count bowl games. And then
I don't know how people did that without feeling like dirty about that.
Because Notre Dame did not want to play bowl games. And so that's part of that.
I'm talking about if you lost the bowl game and you still turned around and said, we're the champions, I think that's garbage. I'm sorry. I think that's garbage.
That's why they were split national titles.
Yeah.
In 1969, I think, even in I don't know 69, but I know in 1970, Texas won a national title and Nebraska won a national title. And it's just at Iowa State. Jamie Pollard joins us. Sikkim 365 Radio and 365 Sports. Jamie, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. With the Big 12 governance meetings about to begin, what's the difference between something that goes on this week compared to other Big 12 meetings? Is this more the administration part of it, or also what?
Well, the biggest difference is this is the opportunity for the directors of athletics to meet with our president. So we get to meet with the board, but we also have our faculty athletics reps here and our senior women's administrators. So it's more administrative. We met with the coaches back in the early part of May, but the big part of this meeting is that we get an opportunity to be in front of all of our presidents.
When you look at where the conference is today compared to July of last year at the end of where they were, after the story with Texas and Oklahoma, are you sometimes, I don't think say thrilled, but blown away at how quickly things have turned back in favor of the Big 12?
Absolutely. Commissioner Bowlesby deserves a ton of credit for getting the ship righted fairly quickly and allowed us to be able to see a pathway forward. And it's been just really exciting to be able to have 4 new members joining the league, that their staff, their coaches, their fan bases are all just ecstatic to be in the Big 12. And that's just a pleasant feeling because, as you know, you've covered this for years. It always just felt like there was always something going on in the Big 12. And it's just really refreshing to have 4 fan bases and institutions that couldn't be more pleased to be joining the Big 12.
When did you feel that the teams were unified as opposed to divided when all that went down last summer? Because there was, as soon as you hear those things, you've got this window of like, well, I wonder what everybody else is doing and where their interest and loyalties will lie when it comes down to what the future holds for the conference.
Well, I'm a realist, and so I always approach that process. And part of it, quite frankly, I was the only president or AD that was there last time that was still here. And so I used to joke with my colleagues and say, I still have, the calluses on my back from how that felt. What changed it for, I believe, was the day the Pac-12 announced they weren't going to expand. Because prior to that, everybody was kind of on pins and needles, and I get it. We all knew that we needed to stick together where there would be strength in numbers. But at the same time, I understand if somebody had an opportunity somewhere else to just shore up their future, why wouldn't they do that? And the day the Pac-12 announced they weren't expanding, it wasn't 3 days later that our game plan was set and Commissioner Bowlesby went and implemented it, and we were rolling.
Jamie, Commissioner Bowlesby obviously stepping down here soon. You guys are in the midst of, going through a process of trying to find the next commissioner. Did you feel like the timing played out right, that his kind of final deal, if you will, was making sure the conference was on solid footing? And now as there's this new era where so many things are changing, does it feel like the timing's perfect to welcome in somebody new in that leadership role?
Well, I'd first say, our industry needs more Bob Bowlesbys than less. So there is a part of me that's sad and disappointed that Bob's not going to be at the table, because he is somebody for all of us over the years. It's a thankless job, yet at the same time, he always did it with integrity. He cares about student athletes. And most importantly, from the director of athletics standpoint, he was one of us. So he understood the issues we all deal with on our campus. At the same time, there's an end to all of our times in leadership, and he had no intentions to going beyond his current contract. And so for him to step aside at this point in time so that we can tackle the big issues that we have in front of us, which is onboarding the 4 new members, offboarding the 2 outgoing members, and solidifying our television future, it's tough to leave in the middle of that. So I think what he did is he got the 4 new members lined up, and then now's the time to hand off the baton to the next person to take it from here.
When do you think that the 2 outgoing members, I know what's being said, do you think there's any chance that they could be leaving before 2025? And would that be best for the Big 12 if they did?
Well, that's a real loaded question because if we've learned anything through all of this, and I'll even go back to the last time we went through this back in 2010-12, you can say something today and it could change tomorrow.
Yep.
So what I would say is anything can always happen. It doesn't feel like they're going to leave before then. There are a lot of challenges for them to leave. Some of them being financial, others being some other issues. That's not to say that there couldn't be something worked out, but to my understanding, they are in through the duration. And to say whether there's an advantage or disadvantage, I could cite both. It would just depend on the particular situation. My gut tells me the only way they're really leaving early is if a television partner wants to negotiate that with an opportunity to use that to help the Big 12 solidify their television, our television deal.
Mm-hmm.
Absent that, I just don't see it happening. But I've been wrong on this many a time.
But there's no way that they're going to be able to walk out the door if they walk out the door early without giving a nice, stiff, thick check to the rest of those in the conference, right?
Well, what the challenge is there's two things. There's bylaws that specify what a dollar amount would be for breaking the bylaw. But then there's the grant of rights, and there's not a dollar of value assigned to that grant of rights. And quite frankly, that grant of rights was put in place by our television partners and the Oklahoma General Counsel because the television partners didn't want to be negotiate a new deal with the Big 12, and then then a school leaves and goes to another conference, and then that conference renegotiates, and they've kind of negotiated against themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So the grant of rights, the ACC has them, the Big 12 has them, the SEC has them. So to pierce it in this case really would pierce it everywhere. And so it's just not something that you can just say, well, we're going to break. Because if the grant of rights isn't any good in the Big 12, then it's not good in the ACC. And then what does that mean for Florida State and Clemson? And ultimately, what does that mean for the ESPN with the ACC network? And so there's just a lot of issues that go beyond, well, there's an $80 million bylaw requirement. And so I don't think it's just that simple. Yet, the television partners could come to the table and say, hey, let's just move on for everybody's sake. And here's what we would do in order to make that happen. That that could be a different story, but right now that's not on the table.
What do you think is once governance comes into understanding, whatever that turns out being, and I guess we'll have more understanding, here in the coming months and weeks. But what do you think is the next biggest thing for college athletics to wrap their arms around after governance?
Wow, that's a tough one for me because governance is just so all-encompassing. Because, for example, the plan on the table from some of the Big Ten athletics directors to move football to the college football playoff, that sounds simple because it's just a statement, but the backfilling of all of what that would require. And then what does that mean for basketball? And what does that mean for other sports? So, the governance structure could be solved in a way that creates other issues, or it could be just solved with, well, here's another set of NCAA parameters that are coming out of the Transformation Committee. And if that happens, then I think the next big challenge will be, well, really what happens with the college football playoff? Because there's so much money involved in that particular situation that it really could drive what the future looks like. And I say that with this lens. You don't have to go back very far in history to watch how this has played out before. The NAIA was basically made obsolete by the creation of the NCAA. And the AIWA, which I believe, whatever that acronym was, which was Women's Athletics,
Mm-hmm.
was deemed obsolete by the creation of the NAIA. And so, you don't have to really spend a lot of time connecting the dots to say, if college football breaks away and, pick your organization, but let's say it's the College Football, Association, you don't have to, let your mind go very far to say that could be the end of the NCAA, just like the NCAA made basically the NAIA obsolete. So it'll be real interesting just to see how this all plays out.
Jamie, how much different is your day scheduled in terms of what you spend time on now because of NIL, because of transfer portal, because of governance, because of all these things versus, let's say, even a couple of years ago?
Well, probably the most amount of time is just spent on trying to decipher what's fact and what's not. There's personally the NIL and pay for play at Iowa State University hasn't really caused us a whole lot of consternation, other than your head's always on a swivel because there's these rampant rumors of everything that's supposedly happening or not happening. And quite frankly, at Iowa State, we've got a great set of coaches that have been with us for a while, much like Baylor does. And they're grounded in great culture. Mack's got a great culture at Baylor. And the coaches are able to trade on what they do really well, which is develop athletes and build trust and help young men and young women prepare for life after sport. And they do it extremely well, and we do it extremely well. And that's what I think we're trying to be focused on. At the same time, there's just all this noise that can be a distraction, but you got to let it not be a distraction.
Jamie, when you meet tomorrow, or when the meetings occur this week, and whether it's this one or the ones that was back in Scottsdale, whatever it is, can you try to describe the room, what UT and Oklahoma are allowed to be a part of or not? Are they like? Is it like a mediation where you guys are meeting and then you go into another room and explain to them what's been said?
No, they've been in it as full members. They've been in everything. They were in Phoenix. They were in probably 95%. The only thing that they left the room for was when we talked about future branding, which it just didn't make any sense to have them in the room and wasting their time on that part of it. No, but we also had the new members with us in Phoenix, and we're going to have the new members with us this week, which was also a different dynamic for everybody in the room. So, the gist of it, actually, what I would tell you how Phoenix was, and especially because we had the coaches with us in Phoenix, it actually was refreshing because, all these rumors that are out there about this school's doing that and this school's doing that, it was great to be in the room and realize all of us are having those same issues and challenges and concerns. And, I think what's happened, much like a lot of things in life, we're led to believe that the 1% is the 99%. And when you're in the 99%, sometimes without being in a room with others, you tend to start thinking you are the 1%. And then you go to the meeting and you realize, no, all of us are in the same boat. And it's never as bad or as good as we all think it is.
I saw your tweets over the weekend about the NCAA, the various qualifiers of the regional meets and all that. And I saw your notes about a couple of different races that the NCAA ruled one way or the other. And I know you weren't happy about it, but I want to get into that because are they listening at all? And number two, you're having a pretty darn good year athletically. I think out after the winter fall and winter, you were 20th in the Directors Cup. And I know that you've done some good things since then as an organization, as an athletic department. Can you talk, first of all, about the NCAA and various rulings they made in track and field the last few days?
Well, it's just a travesty for student athletes. The fact of the matter is, it would be if we told the officials in basketball that you can call everything normally for the round of 32 and for the Elite Eight and for the Final Four. But in any game involving the Sweet 16, you can't use DVD Sports. You can't make any calls during the game. Because that's in essence what they did for the track regionals. And there are 5 student athletes, one at Florida State, two at Arkansas, one at Air Force, one at Iowa State, that are going to be sitting home for no fault of their own because the NCAA Track and Field Committee put a rule in that said when you're competing for the final 12 spots at one of the two regional sites, the referee it doesn't matter what happens. Somebody could come out of the stands and tackle the person that's winning. The officials cannot advance anybody more than 12. And it's a crying shame for those 5 student athletes. And I'll go to my grave fighting for student athletes. And we're going to get that rule changed somehow, some way, because it is flat out wrong. And it's embarrassing to me that an NCAA staff member would have allowed that rule to be put in place and or not created a waiver, because we all know they've made so many waivers in the history of college athletics, and they couldn't make waivers for those 5 student athletes. It's just, I'm embarrassed to say I'm part of the NCAA because they did that to those 5 athletes. At the same time, I mean, I was upset enough that I was ready to resign from the basketball committee. And if it wasn't for Commissioner Bowlesby, who said you can't do that because basically you'd be giving up and letting them win, we need more people like you that are willing to fight to the bitter end. And it's been exciting to see some commissioners that have come on board to say, we got to get this changed. It is flat out wrong what we did, and it's sad. And it makes me wonder what I only know about it because I was at the meet. The fact is, there was no NCAA rep at the meet. The 2 committee members that were at the West Regional didn't even watch the race that I was watching. They were under the grandstands doing whatever. I don't know, but they didn't watch it. That's just sad. It's sad. And so if that's happening in other sports, God help us. Makes me wonder. No wonder the student athletes think what they think about the NCAA and what we do. So I'll get off my high horse.
No. Get on that high horse. I want to get to your school, but did you just petition to become the next president of the NCAA? Wouldn't you like to take over that job, or was you even want to get close to that job?
Well, I can tell you this. If I was in charge of it, there'd be some people that wouldn't have jobs this morning. Because the only people that are being held accountable are the student athletes. Mm-hmm. And everybody else goes back to their little life. And there'll be a group of people that'll have VIP passes out at the national meet in Eugene, and we'll be enjoying the track meet. And there'll be 5 athletes that should be there that won't be there because of the bureaucracy of the NCAA and people afraid to stand up and do what's right for student athletes. So, back to Iowa State. Yes, we're having our best year ever. 20th in the Directors' Cup. Couldn't be more excited. What I'd tell you is people of that, we won the Cy-Hawk series. We're in the top half of the Big 12 in all sports standings. We're second in the Directors' Cup standings of Big 12 schools. And when people ask, well, why are we having this? What I'd tell you is, back when we had COVID, our coaches made some decisions to give up their paychecks, to give up their bonuses so that we didn't have to lay any staff off. And we did that, and we specifically talked about this, is that when we come out of COVID, we're going to need everybody on board. And if we keep everybody employed, I'm talking janitors, all the entry-level people, if we keep everybody employed somehow, some way, we're going to be better positioned to have success quicker than others. And I'm convinced that's why we're in the position we're in, because we had coaches that were willing to say, I will give up in order to make sure this person doesn't lose their job. And it's exciting to have that be rewarded.
Jamie, Smokey and I have a very good friend, Adam, who is an Iowa State graduate. I was actually at his house yesterday, having a barbecue, and Smokey sent me the text that we were going to have you on the show, and I said, as an Iowa State grad, just give me a couple of terms about how you feel about Jamie Pollard, and he said, passionately love it, like he's great, all the fans love him, and I just talking to you for 10 minutes, I can see exactly why he and the Iowa State fans feel that way because of your very clear dedication to this job, which it's fun to hear and hear you go into how passionate you are about these issues.
Well, I appreciate that. It might be my background as a Division III track athlete. Coach Campbell's a Division III athlete. Coach Otzelberger is a Division III athlete. Coach Fenley was a Division III athlete. We did it for the love of the game. No one was giving us a scholarship. And as I told the NCAA this weekend, I'm on the basketball committee, but I'm the athletics director for 400 student athletes, not just football and basketball players. And it's a crying shame in this particular situation that 5 track athletes are treated like they don't matter. If this was basketball or football, you can bet darn sure this would have never happened.
Jamie, you used the term student athlete there a few times, a real emphasis on that. It's a term that Mack Rhoades uses all the time, but it's kind of a term that some people are almost moving away from as this college landscape kind of changes. How important is it to you? Because I've asked Mack this before, and I know how important it is to him, but how important is it to you that no matter what changes in the future as far as college athletics goes, that the student athlete part of student athlete remains important?
Oh, it's the utmost. I mean, it's higher education. That's what we're there for. And for those that criticize and say it's not, again, it's not the 1%, it's the 99%. I've got 450 student athletes at Iowa State, and 445 of the 450 will never get to play their sport ever again competitively when they're done at Iowa State. That's why I go back to these 5 student athletes that aren't getting to compete at the NCAA. They're never going to get that chance again. It's track and field.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a chance to go play over in Europe and back. So I take that extremely important that they're student athletes. And so, our nation has struggled with minor league sports. Minor league baseball players, they'll talk about being on buses and eating macaroni and cheese. Football's never gotten it right. If it wasn't for the NBA standing up and supporting the G League, that didn't work either. So why would we think college athletics can turn into minor league sports? That's not sustainable. And if it does, it'll just become the new football and basketball minor league sports, and all those other 450 student athletes will lose out on an opportunity to get a paid education. And other than the federal Pell Grant Association, whatever you call that, we're the largest provider of financial aid for students to go to college. And it's a great opportunity for thousands of student athletes. And so I'll always vouch for that, because we don't need more minor league sports.
Jamie, being a part of the NCAA men's basketball committee, and you have been for 3 years with a couple of years to go, and you mentioned about how mad you were that you wanted to give that roll up and Bob Bowlesby changed your mind or asked you not to. Can you see, if the NCAA does not get their act together, the way they might lose the football playoff? Could you see them ever doing that in men's basketball and having the conferences run it?
Absolutely can see it happening. Absolutely can see it happening.
That says a lot. Hey, Mack Rhoades thinks a lot of you. He's talked about you quite a bit. I know you're about to see him. Jamie, we appreciate you very much. You're an inspiration to a lot of people as well for what you've done to fight as well. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate you having me on.
Hope to meet you one day. Jamie Pollard, Athletic Director, Iowa State University. And, boy, how about some truth serum? Brett McMurphy, one of the senior writers covering college football and has been for quite some time. College Football Insider, Action Network HQ. He is someone that does a lot when it comes to coaching changes, etc. Joins us on Sick on 365 Radio and 365 Sports. Brett, thank you very much. I've been watching watching some of your reporting from the.
Puente. We'll do it, Dave.
I don't think he realizes he's on with us.
Yeah. Did you talk to him?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. All right. Brett, you there?
Okay, that's cool. I understand.
Hold on one second.
We're going to catch something we don't want to catch, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, we'll get him on here in just a second. He was obviously there. He's at SEC Media Days in Destin, Florida, and has been reported on some of the stuff going on. Brett, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. SEC Media Days in Destin. Has it been kind of just a big thud on Nick and Jimbo Fisher? Did you guys want to see a little bit more? Or is this kind of what you expected? They would just kind of let this thing die?
Well, I figured Saban would not want to discuss it, and he, talked to the media yesterday, and he, said, "I'm done talking about it." And, he was asked specifically, what evidence do you have that Jimbo Fisher, Texas A&M, bought their entire recruiting class? And he said, "I never said anyone broke the rules." And they followed it up with, "That's fine, but what evidence do you have?" And he said, "I'm not talking about it anymore." and he wouldn't talk about it anymore. Today, Jimbo, we had a chance to talk to Jimbo, and we asked Jimbo every way you could think of about his comments about Saban. Did he regret them? Has the NCAA contacted him about them? Does he want to take anything back? And he basically had the same message. I'm done talking about it. It's time to move on. We've got bigger things to worry about regarding college football as far as NIL, transfer portal, scheduling model here for the SEC and different things. So I think as much as, the media wants to keep this thing going, this thing is going to be dead at least for until 139 days, because that's how many days are left until A&M visits Tuscaloosa.
Brett, on the scheduling model, I mean, obviously 3-6 is the favorite. 1-8, I guess, is the other one. But what do you think ultimately it will be, and what would be the holdup to anything right now?
Yeah, 3-6 seems the most likely. Look, nothing's 100%, but from everyone I'm talking to, they are going to get rid of divisions. The question is it does it happen next season, or is it not until Oklahoma and Texas join the league in 2025 unless something moves that up? But, yeah, I think the 3-6 model is the best way to go. I think everyone agrees with that. Jimbo Fisher was asked specifically, if he would want Texas as a permanent opponent when they come into the league, and he said, we want to play Texas every year. So, Texas, for example, they have to play, you just look, they have to play Oklahoma. They have to play A&M. I would argue they have to play Arkansas. So those may be their three right there. But then Texas LSU, that would be a incredible rivalry too. So 3-6 makes the most sense. That way, somebody that's in the SEC, if they're at a school for 4 years, they'll have the opportunity to play every school at least once.
Brad, we've covered the changes since July of last year with Texas OU and the SEC and the story, and all of it since that time. Where do you see the Big 12 now compared to what could have happened when all hell broke loose, where they could have just buckled and died?
Well, yeah. I mean, the alternative is they don't exist. The alternative is, the ACC, the Big Ten, the Pac-12. They came out and said, "Well, we're gonna do this alliance. We're not gonna expand for the good of college football." That's hogwash. The reason why they didn't expand is because they didn't believe that any of the remaining Big 12 members, whether it's Baylor, look, I'm an Oklahoma State alum, so whether it's Baylor, Oklahoma State, whoever, added any value to those leagues. That's why they didn't expand. It wasn't for the good of college football. So when you're talking about what could have happened, if they would have felt that any of those schools left over in the Big 12 would have added value, then they would have plucked them. And then you go from, 8 remaining members to maybe 6, maybe 4, and then there may not be a Big 12 anymore. And, that would have been the worst case scenario. I think the Big 12 was smart in that, in the past when we've had realignment, conferences have gone into areas of the country they haven't been to kind of expand their footprint, if you will, for TV ratings and those sort of things. While the Big 12 obviously did that a little bit, obviously they're already in Texas with Houston, but what the Big 12 did is said, let's find the best football programs available that we can get. And I think they went out and they got the 4 best that they could get. And, you look at the years that those schools had last year, and you're also obviously getting 4 really good programs that are on the upswing. And, I think the Big 12 will be able to survive. And, when all this happened with OU in Texas, I was at SEC Media Days when the news broke. It's a lot better than the alternative. And that may have been the Big 12 going the same route as the Southwest Conference. And we know where they are right now.
So, Brett, when the topic of the SEC-only playoff kind of got thrown out there last week, I know Sankey's followed up on that and talked about that, and I think he made a very fair point as far as it not being a warning, even though it probably feels like that to most people, that it's more about like, well, there's just nothing else out there. Like, there's literally nothing under contract past a certain amount of time. How have you kind of read the room as far as the talk about the SEC hosting its own playoff if it came down to that?
So if we would have had this conversation last year, I would have said, well, SEC's not doing their own playoff. That's ridiculous. They're never going to do that. But you know what? The more that I talk to people and the more frustration I get from the SEC about what happened with the college football playoff, with the 12-team, proposed format getting squashed. I think it's a possibility. Do I think it's going to happen? I'd say it's more likely that it doesn't happen, but I don't think it's impossible. And the thing is, when OU and Texas come in the fold, you've got 16 schools. Sure, you want to have a national playoff, but, Greg Sankey admitted, the other day, he's like, look, I'm not for a playoff that takes automatic qualifiers, because if you've got an 18 playoff, why should the team that finishes 24th in the country replace the number 18 just because they won a conference? And that makes a lot of sense. The issue is the SEC is the only league that wants the highest ranked teams, regardless of conference, in the playoffs. So I'm sure part of this is a negotiating ploy. But you're right. Sankey brought up a great point. The playoff ends in 2025, the current 14 playoff. And then after that, there's nothing. It's not like, I don't know if fans realize this. It doesn't mean we're just going to extend the 14 playoff another year or two until they figure something out. The contract's done. There's no playoff. So they've got to come up with a new model, whether that's 4 teams, whether that's 8, whether Mike Leach gets his wish and we have a 64-team playoff. Unfortunately, I don't think that'll happen. There's nothing in place, guys. And, yeah, it's 4 years off, but you need to start planning stuff now, because I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of people in college football have. The NFL is already starting to grab some of these dates in January. There's Super Wild Card Weekend. That's on a Monday. That would have been when the proposed 12-team national title game would have been a week later than the current one is now. Well, now they can't play then, because why? College football is not going to go head-to-head with the NFL. So now the longer you wait, the fewer dates on the calendar you have. Also, a lot of these facilities, a lot of these venues that would be open to hosting a college football playoff or semifinal games, they're signing up to do, different events, whether it's NFL events or NFL, NBA, or just non-sporting events. So you're getting a smaller number of venues that can host it, and you're getting squeezed on the dates. And so that's why Sankey said something yesterday. It's like, look, they need to kind of do something. But again, it goes back to the biggest problem involving college football is no one ultimately is in charge, so everybody's just doing kind of what's best for themselves and not necessarily what's best for all of college football.
Brett, I would think you do. You have a vote in the Associated Press poll?
I do, yes, I do.
Would you, if you had a vote and it was just 16 or 18 or 20 teams in the SEC, would you vote them a national champion if there were other teams that were not a part of their playoff?
Well, I can't just blanketly say that I would do it, but I would look if I had Georgia or Alabama number one, or no, last year, and they played in a SEC only playoff, and they won the SEC only playoff, and I had them one going into the playoff. I'm not going to drop them because they only beat SEC teams. I mean, I would have thought they were number one beforehand, and I would say that with any conference. If I had, Oklahoma or Baylor at number one, and it was a Big 12 only playoff, and they won that, I don't think I would necessarily just drop them because they didn't beat, somebody from the Big 10 or from the Pac-12. So again, it's hard to just, say this is definitely what I would do. But usually when a team, as far as me, I don't know what other people think. If I've got a team ranked number one, they've got to either lose or somebody behind them has to beat somebody much more impressively than the team ahead of them did to jump that team, especially that late in the season, because you've seen them play, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 games.
Brett McMurphy, Action Network HQ, with us on Sikkim 365 Radio and 365 Sports.
Brett, you were mentioning that January is slipping away from college football, but we've had Tim Brand on the show a bunch of times, and one of the things he was always talking about is they've already let December go. Like, what? When are they going to realize that they have 2 months they could grab, and just if they just schedule it now and work out the details later? I mean,
look, that's a great question, and that makes sense. The problem is the things that usually make sense don't happen. They had a 12-team playoff set. They were ready to go with it. But then the the Pac-12, the ACC, and the Big Ten, got their feelings hurt because Texas and OU were leaving to go to the SEC, so they wanted to pull back. Like, there was this big conspiracy theory that, well, this is why everyone agreed to a 12-team playoff, because Texas and OU were leaving. Well, Notre Dame was in favor of that. The Mountain West commissioner was in favor of that. Bob Bowlesby was in favor of that. He had no idea. So it's just comical that the Big Ten, the Pac-12, and the ACC pushed back on this because of OU and Texas, when you don't even have to put a gun to their head. You just ask them point blank, would you have taken OU or Texas? And every one of those leagues would have said absolutely yes. Mm-hmm. So you're right. January 1st used to be a special day. And that would be the day you'd have all the major bowl games. We'd have split national championships. You would actually, teams that, if somebody lost the Cotton Bowl, that meant somebody playing in the Rose Bowl had a chance to win, or if the wrong team won, then the Orange Bowl champ had to win. And you watch that all day. Now it's scattered all over the place. Look, I know if January 1st is a Sunday, NFL's on that day, you're going to move off that day. But now they're all over the map. The Sugar Bowl this year, it's not part of the semifinals, but the Big 12 champ, the highest ranked Big 12 team not in the college football playoff, if there is one, will go to the Sugar Bowl. That game, 11 a.m. kickoff. Who wants to play? That's 11 a.m. local. Who wants to play at 11 a.m. in a supposed New Year's Six game? It's just, and you're right. They are losing December. They're losing January. And there's not a lot of options left. I mean, we're getting to the point. I wrote this a couple weeks ago. I was half serious, half joking, but we're going to have the national title game being played Wednesday at 2 p.m. in the afternoon at this rate.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. If that early, or if that late, Brett, on the SEC being against an automatic qualifier, a conference champion. If that's the case, and I know why they have conference championship games, because there's money. But if you can't crown the conference champion, why play the game? If that doesn't matter, why play the game?
Well, you've answered your own question. It's because of money. Why the SEC is the first FBS conference that had a conference championship game. Mm-hmm. Why did they do it? For money. They didn't do it. There was no BCS back then. There was no, I think it was 1991 was the first one, if I remember correctly. Maybe off by a few years. The SEC had the first one. It was at Birmingham. It was at Legion Field in Birmingham. It was outside. It was cold. It was miserable. Alabama beat Florida. They didn't do it. They didn't do it because it would help Alabama get into a better bowl game, or they didn't do it because Florida had a chance to get higher in the national rankings. They did it for one reason: money. That's why they did it. That's why they continue to do it, and that's why even if they get rid of automatic qualifiers, they will continue to do it. Because at least for the SEC, I think the Big Ten's probably in the same boat. Those two conferences make a boatload of money off that game. The other conferences, it depends a lot on which teams are in, those sort of things. But they're always going to make money off those games. So no matter what the playoff format is, I don't see the SEC getting rid of a conference championship game unless they have their own, unless it's an SEC only playoff. Then certainly I don't think you would have an SEC conference championship game and then turn around and have an SEC-only playoff.
I still think the SEC has a bubble. They are going to have more teams ranked in the preseason poll in the top 5 or 10. They're going to always have 3 to 5, it seems like, in the top. So I'm not sure what they were worried about. And I understand what they're worried about. But God bless, it'd be nice every once in a while for there to be some kind of a shocker in the SEC game. But, of course, that has rarely ever happened. Thanks for your time, man. I hope you've enjoyed Destin. Is the weather great? Have you had a chance to do anything but just go inside and do interviews?
Yeah, unfortunately, I spent most of my time in the lobby, but I did come outside to talk to you guys, so
Thank
it's
you.
only a few feet. Yeah, it's nice here in Destin, and anyone that's never been, I highly recommend it. Just don't come Memorial Day weekend unless you want to see a lot of SEC folks.
Brett, thank you very much. We appreciate your time from the Action Network HQ headquarters, a national senior writer covering college football. Yeah, and on the
We're joined now by Zach Barnett, footballscoop.com. And if you don't go to footballscoop.com, you should. It's a great website that, they just have every kind of football news you can possibly imagine, especially for college football. They do a great job. And Zach Barnett joins us now. And Zach, right now the big story nationally is, what is the SEC going to do about their scheduling model? For years, they were very adamant about staying at 8 games. Now that they're about to have 16 games, a 9th game makes a ton of sense. The popular model is 3-6, but some teams are holding out, hoping that they do 1-7, which to me doesn't make a lot of sense. Where do you think this will eventually head?
I mean, I think with any of these issues in college sports, or I guess in business in general, you follow the money, and there's far more money to be had in expanding the 9 games, both on the front end or on the large scale, because that's 8 extra games you can sell to ESPN, and that's another game you can sell to season ticket holders, another game of concessions, and on the money train rolls. I mean, I think the goal here is to diversify the SEC schedule that everyone in that conference agrees has grown stale, and to go to the 1-7 model where you would lose annual games like Auburn, Georgia, LSU, Ole Miss, Alabama, Tennessee, in Texas A&M. I mean, it feels like a step backwards. In reality, it would all be done to protect the Arkansas and the Kentucky's ability to make the Birmingham Bowl. Like, it seems real penny wise and pound foolish.
Yeah, I guess it's pretty clear to most people, Zach, that this 3-6 seems to make the most sense. What argument do you think there is, if any, for the alternative?
I read a story today about how I think most people expected when the ADs got in that room yesterday, they'd hash it out and come to a pretty quick consensus that most of us got to, which is the 3-6 model. And then I think some minds were changed during that meeting towards the 1-7. I can't sit here and say who's on what side, but I think it's much closer to 50-50 than it was before the meetings. And I think the concerns are twofold. One being the bowl bids, and 2 being access to the college football playoff, because as of yet, we've yet to have a 2-loss team make the playoff. And so I think some are arguing that adding another conference game would be the SEC, cutting off its nose to spite its face. But that ignores the reality that outside of the SEC, right now the SEC is the only conference that would be okay with keeping the playoff at 4 teams. Everyone else wants it to expand. So it's going to go to 8 or 12. And then at that point, the SEC and the Big Ten will probably both get 10 and 2 teams in the playoff. And at that point will become irrelevant.
Yeah, it seems to me that every argument you hear against either expanding the playoff or changing the schedule is, what if this very specific and rare situation would happen, which I don't think is a good argument for anything.
Yeah, it's very small-time thinking. I mean, what best serves students, fans, players is to be able to play SEC teams as often as possible. What best serves TV partners and therefore the money people within the athletics department is to play SEC games as often as possible. So clearly, those two constituencies are far best served by the 3-6 model. And so I have to believe that's still going to be the one that wins out in the end.
Zach, the SEC spring meeting's going on. There was a lot of talk, a week ago about, it's Saban and Jimbo going to be in the same room. It's not turned out to be much in terms of, actual drama or anything like that. Quite the opposite, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I think both of those guys said what they need to say. Jimbo, in particular, got what he wanted out of it. He said his piece and won the exchange. I mean, I'm sure you guys saw the story that the A&M baseball team basically painted a mural of him in the dugout of the SEC baseball tournament. I mean, his approval rating within Aggie Nation is about 150% right now. So there's really no reason for them to get into it. I'm sure tensions will flare again on the recruiting trail or in October. But really, I mean, what it boils down to is an issue of semantics. I think no longer is it a pejorative to say that a coach bought a player or a recruiting class in right, wrong, or indifferent. And Jimbo took offense to that when really he could, if he just come out and said, yeah, we're ahead of the game here. Our staff and our fans have done a great job, and they've put us in a great position to succeed. Then this whole story would have been a big nut. This whole story would have even been a story.
Zach, one thing we haven't talked about on our show yet, but I thought it was an interesting story, and I saw it on the website, and it's outside the SEC. But Jeff Brom, a week ago or so, was doing an interview, and they asked him about not taking the Louisville job, and he said, look, he likes Purdue, but it's year 6, and you never know what's going to happen in the future. But the Louisville job isn't obviously open. Scott Satterfield had that job, but he's not really all that popular there right now. How do you and he's responded to it. How do you see that situation playing itself out in Louisville, especially now that they have a new AD who may not want to be saddled with Scott Satterfield?
Yeah, I mean, Scott Satterfield's certainly on thin ice at Louisville, especially given the fact that Louisville has after enjoying a long period of time as the premier program in that state, has certainly fallen behind Kentucky football in that state. They're just kind of a drift in the middle of the pack, anonymous program within the ACC, which is not that great of a conference right now. And then the fact that I don't think he's ever really gotten over, at least in the minds of a lot of fans, of him, interviewing for the South Carolina job in 2020. And now here you have, literally the crown prince of Louisville football and Jeff Brom, who's, the son of a former Louisville quarterback and Louisville high school coach who says he'd be open to it. And yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. Scott Satterfield needs to have a really good year. And you look at their schedule, as I wrote about in our article, their first 9 games, probably 7 of them could go either way. They get South Florida, which should be a win. They open against Syracuse. They should beat them. They play James Madison. They should beat them. The other 6 really could go either way. And their last 3 are probably, as of now, probably losses. They close with Clemson, NC State, and Kentucky. So if they go into those games, something like, 5-4, something like that, they could be staring a 5-7 season right in the face. And then at that point, the Jeff Brom talk starts to heat up big time.
Zach, we've, obviously anybody covering college football these days has spent a lot of time talking about NIL, talking about the transfer portal. Now we've got all of these leagues, doing away with their championship games, trying to streamline scheduling, trying to just figure out ways to kind of shake things up. And we've also discussed before how the NFL has seemingly just taken all this free land that college football has given them, especially in the month of December, and gladly taken it. As college football as a whole is shifting and changing in every type of way imaginable, what do you think is imperative for the sport overall, or what moves would you like to see the sport overall make to further establish its foundation or to maybe grow a bit?
I think some sort of NIL standard baseline would be great. I'm not holding my breath because at this point it seems like only Congress has the authority to step in there, and they certainly don't seem interested in that. But I think ultimately, college football's problems are on the field. And I think, I really think if A&M, if Texas, if USC and Miami can get their act together, then this monopoly we have at the top of Alabama, Georgia, throw Ohio State, the SEC powers as we think of them, plus Ohio State, that monopoly could break up. And if you have some real parity at the top, then this sport becomes really, really fun to follow, at least during the season again.
Zach, what do you think is going to, you mentioned 8 or 12. What do you think is the best model, and what do you think that they will eventually do on the playoff?
I mean, I still think the model that they originally trotted out there, the 12-team playoff with 6 auto bids and 6 at-large bids, I think that satisfies the largest numbers of concerns. I think it already would have been passed if not for A, Texas and OU joining the SEC, and B, if not for the Big Ten, bizarrely throwing in that they need an auto bid, even though I don't think there's ever been a time when the Big Ten champion has been the 7th highest rated conference champion. I don't think that's ever happened, but for some reason they felt like they needed that protection. So at the end of the day, I still think that satisfies the most needs because that makes the most money. And as I said in my first answer here, usually whatever makes the most money for the most people ends up winning out.
Would you consider the winner of an SEC playoff the national champion?
No. I mean, usually there's at least one team out there that has to that can make an argument. And first of all, I don't think that an all SEC playoff is anything more than a bargaining chip. Mm-hmm. And second of all, I think if it were to be done, I think it would be done with the idea that the all SEC winner plays the alliance winner, for lack of a better term, and it set up mirroring the old Super Bowl when it was the AFL and the NFL.
Zach Barnett, footballscoop.com. Zach, thanks so much for hopping on with us today. And again, like I told people, if you're not on Football Scoop, you got to be on Football Scoop. Great website.
I agree.
Yeah.
Hey, we'll ask you real quick because you guys do delve so much into the football. How about Tim Brewster going to Jackson State?
I mean, that guy has just been all over the place, hasn't he?
Right.
I mean, that right there told me. I think we've all believed that Deion's prepping for an eventual Power 5 move, and that right there is a move that he's getting that guy for the next job.
Yeah, it definitely
Smart.
feels like that. Yeah, it is. And I wonder what that job will be. As a Florida State alum, I'm very curious about it. Very, very curious. Because, the kind of rumors, Zach, I don't know if you heard this, but like his interview when they hired Mike Norvell, everybody kind of thought like, oh, they're giving Deion kind of an interview because he's Deion. But they said apparently his interview was great. They just weren't comfortable making that jump right then. So,
Oh, I believe that. I believe the entire reason he took the Jackson State job was to eventually get the Florida State job. If Mike Norvell, goes 12-0 this year, I think he would, take another Power 5 job if offered to him. But there's no doubt in my mind that this entire mission has been to get the Florida State job.
All right. Well, you know what? I'm fine with that. I'm fine with it. Like, look, it's been too long since the glory days. Zach, thanks so much for joining us. Have a great weekend. And again, get on footballscoop.com.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Saw this 2 or 3 days ago. Scott Dochterman from theathletic.com. Big Ten, SEC spending the summer debating future alignments, trying to protect important rivalries. And he joins us now, Scott Dochterman, on Sikkim 365 Radio. Scott, this had to be kind of intriguing because I'm sure everybody has their own mind made up on who are the rivalries. How difficult of a process will this be, or is it going to be kind of easy?
I think it's going to be a real challenge because I think you kind of straddle that line between rivalry preservation and what's best for the conference. And in most cases, the conference want to have a kind of a fair amount or a set amount of rivalry games determined. If there's, say, 2 for each league or 3 for each league, and then cycle through the remaining opponents. But when you have so much expansion and you have teams that, like in the SEC in Missouri, that has only been there, 10 years, 9 years, and in the Big Ten of Maryland and Rutgers, those teams don't have rivalries established. And so there's not a real importance for them to make sure to play these games. But then when you're in the SEC or the Big Ten and you look at Mississippi State LSU, for instance, they played 115 times. And now, is it a rivalry? Well, that's up to the determination of whether you think playing 115 times counts or you just played a lot. So it's going to be a real fascinating debate as to what are the heated games over the last 10 years, maybe an Alabama LSU figures into that, or 30 years like the SEC's divisional play, or beyond that, in the Big Ten with an Iowa, Wisconsin, or Wisconsin, Nebraska being a new one. So a lot of different fascinating angles to go through with this.
The SEC seems to be leaning towards the 3-6-6 model of the 9 games and rotating. What do you think the Big Ten will do?
I think they're leaning in that direction as well. The only question I have is will it be 2 protected opponents or 3? And 2 weeks ago when I was in Chicago talking to some of the athletic directors, there was a wide variance in what they wanted. Penn State, for instance, the AD who's outgoing at this point, she's retiring next month, but she said there's nobody I would pound the table for that we have to play every year. But then you talk to Minnesota and Iowa's ADs who have 2 or 3, in Iowa's case, 3 really impactful rivalries. You want to play them every year, and if the Big Ten decides to just pick 2, then it's you're cutting off your leg here on your history. So I think they'll end up going with 3. But my case that I tried to make was, look, with these leagues, sometimes it's not worth going everybody gets 3 because who in the Big Ten really wants to play Rutgers every year or Maryland every year if they got a choice? But do you really want to ice out some of the better rivalries, historically? So I think 3 will probably be the magic number for both leagues if they go this route. But at the same time, it wouldn't surprise me if the Big Ten went down to 2.
How much, Scott, do you think this can help some of the imbalance that we see at times with certain divisions, certainly the SEC West, although Georgia now has changed that up a little bit, but for the longest time they were clearly the dominant division, and if you were in that division, you had a much tougher schedule, Big 12 South there for a little while and so on. Do you think this cures the imbalance problem, or are there other issues that arise from it?
It's going to be fascinating because if you look at, like the Big Ten, for instance, in championship games, it's 8-0 in favor of the East. But Ohio State is what skews the divisional structure no matter what they do, legends or leaders or East-West. Since they went geographic, Ohio State 61-5 against the league and 18-2 against the West, and 5-0 in championship games. But when you look at outside of that, the East leads only 77-70 in regular season games. Now, granted, they've won every championship, so it does look significantly imbalanced. I think the question is going forward is, how important is it to your league that the second best team, whether it's objective or subjective, gets a chance at the title, and how will that impact its college football playoff opportunities? Because if you're the Big Ten and you're Penn State in a 12-team playoff, maybe being number 2 in the East and not playing Ohio State for the second time is not the worst opportunity to get into the playoff. However, if you go and you get blitzed in that game, you might not make it. And so that's what the league's got to kind of determine is, is this the best path just to have the best possible matchup for the championship game? Or in some cases, it's not the same as having the best opportunity to make 2 or 3 teams go to the playoff.
I saw your list, critical to keep them, the rivalry, strong discussion and worth consideration, including some new ones, and from old rivals in the Big 12, et cetera. I saw you got a little note from somebody that said, why would the game between LSU and Mississippi State be under critical review? And then your reaction to that was, how many times have they met, Scott?
115.
Yeah. And see, sometimes people look at the elite names, they look at the marquee names, but forget about, and we've seen a lot of incredible series, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and others just disappear. So I would love to see them protect that one.
Yeah, exactly. There are a lot of them that have such rich history that even if sometimes if it's a hammer versus a nail, a Tennessee, Kentucky, they played 117 times. Would anybody say that's a marquee matchup? No. But when you have such a rich tradition and history among those two programs playing for that long, like I looked it up with LSU and Mississippi State, they've missed twice since 1905. Each of them were during world wars, just once in each world war. That is astounding history that you've got to protect at all costs or have a significant discussion as to why that needs to rotate off. And I think every league has those. And some of the other ones I think are really fascinating. You got the Texas A&M, of course. That's going to be one that needs to go on. But, whether it's potential for a new one, Oklahoma, Arkansas, they're so close. I always wondered if Arkansas would have been better in the Big 12 had it been able to join, say, in the 80s, and that could have been a great rivalry. That'd be a fun one to put together. But really, when it comes to rivalry preservation, that has to be at or near the top of the list. And I think that's what I'm glad that this discussion is happening now before these decisions are made, because otherwise, they could be in danger. I mean, these ADs don't stay very long at schools, but fans and rivalries live forever. So I think I'm glad there's going to be a robust discussion about all these rivalries.
Well, I guess the brighter side of all of it is that even if you do skip a year, if they do the way they're saying in 366, you're at least not going to be 9 years like the A&M Georgia, or whatever it is. The first time they're playing is since A&M joined the conferences this year.
Yeah, exactly. There are so many of those little outliers, and A&M Georgia is one that you bring up. In the Big Ten, Iowa's going to Columbus for the first time since 2013, and they've been two of the most successful programs in the Big Ten and they've only played once since 2013. So you've got to get those games cycled through a little bit more often. I think either way, it's going to happen more frequently, once every 2 to 3 years. So you'll at least be able to see these teams with greater frequency, and I think that makes it, whatever league, it makes it with more cohesion than what we've seen in recent years. And I think I'm really anxious to see what the Big 12 will do when it goes to 12 teams, because talked to Jamie Pollard last week. He was adamant that there's not going to be divisions in the new look Big 12, but how are you going to decide those games, who's important to play over and over again? I'm sure with Baylor, it's going to, TCU's got to be on the list, right? Even though they were out of the same league for 20 years or whatever, but still you played 100 times. You've got to keep that going. And so I'm fascinated by all these discussions, because I think they're really vital to keeping the integrity of the game, especially now when we're seeing so much change.
Scott, we had Jamie Pollard on today, and my goodness, I'm not so sure we don't want him to be the NCAA president or the Big 12 commissioner. He had a bunch of truth serum to throw out there.
He does. He is very much a fighter for his university and for what he's passionate and cares about. I would not put it past him. I think he'd be an outstanding somebody you'd want to consider for the Big 12, because I think he will battle for you under each and every situation. And I can only tell you my experiences all these years with having Iowa and Iowa State in the same state. When he came here in late in 2005, Iowa State was a complete afterthought in the state. And he's turned it around to where Iowa's still the flagship, but Iowa State sells out a 60,000-seat stadium. And before, they'd only sell out twice a year. That was when Iowa or Nebraska came to town.
Hey, Scott, thank you, man. We appreciate it. It's interesting because of the constant change, scheduling, realignment, conferences, adding, losing, whatever. And, of course, NIL transfer portal. It gives us a lot to talk about. Great stuff. I loved it. Again, go online, and I just retweeted it as far as Scott's story about the critical, strong discussion and worth consideration rivalries to keep going as the Big Ten and SEC move forward. Thanks for your time. Scott Dochterman at theathletic.com. I just put that up. So the critical series, I know we got Scott Drew coming up. Alabama, Auburn. Alabama, Tennessee. Auburn and Georgia. Georgia, Florida. Ole Miss, Mississippi State. Tennessee, Vanderbilt. Tennessee, Kentucky. A&M and Texas. Texas, OU. LSU, Ole Miss. And LSU, Mississippi State, as he mentioned, 115 meetings.
Yeah, which pushes Arkansas LSU and A&M LSU to the next list. And A&M and LSU is probably the newest rivalry of the big ones.
For a long time they played each other, right?
Yeah, they played every year.
Texas and Arkansas is another one that goes way back. Arkansas, Oklahoma, you would think would have a pretty good series. They had that one Orange Bowl when Arkansas upset Barry Switzer and OU in a game when, heck, I think Arkansas had players who were suspended. That would be one that would make sense to me. Alabama, LSU, long time.
Well, from Ross Dellinger, pods have been eliminated from the discussion for a while. Most field divisions are out too. This is from this morning. AD seems split on 2 future models, 8-game with 1 permanent and 7 rotating, or 9-game with 3, permanents and 6 rotating would be how they would do that.
I like the 3-6. To me, makes a lot more sense. But, I think you'll be better. It'll be better. It'll be different games every year. Nothing gets stale. I'll just say, like, as an FSU fan, we got tired of playing Wake Forest. And then they started beating us, and then it was like, well, we're still tired of playing them. But it was, and the league got bigger, and then you still had to play Wake Forest. And it was like, well, why don't you get to play somebody else more often? To me, the
thing that's interesting is, how do you juggle keeping those rivalries? And then how do you juggle making sure somebody doesn't just get absolutely screwed when it comes to how the schedule flips on who they play every year or every other year based on who else is a part of the schedule? Because that's almost like in golf. You can tee off in the morning and there's no wind. And then the guys go out in the afternoon and they go up against horrible conditions. Then the next day the wind is in the morning and there's no wind in the afternoon. It's sometimes the luck of the draw of when you tee off in a golf tournament can help you win the tournament compared to just who you're playing in the course.
He's on vacation. Mack Rhoades, Baylor Director of Athletics, joins us now. And Mack, obviously the big news this week was that your baseball coach, Steve Rodriguez, has resigned and stepped away from the program after 7 seasons here in Waco. Always a difficult time to make a staff transition. What kind of all went into this for the baseball program?
Well, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you to Steve. He did a great job leading the program for 7 years, and we had some success early when you think about the 3 straight regionals, and then just toward the end, more difficult. I think COVID certainly played a part of that in 20, and then 21 just missed out, and then this year just a hard year. And I think it was a hard year for Steve personally, and for the staff. And so we'll now embark upon a national search and go and try to find the next head coach for baseball. And we've met at least initially, and I reminded everybody that we're hiring more than just a baseball coach. It's not just a baseball coach that we're hiring. We're hiring a leader of young men, and somebody who's going to have great passion and energy, and pour into our student athletes in all ways, and challenge them to be great in everything. And we want baseball. Like our other sport programs, we want it to compete at a level where we're nationally relevant, and that we're consistent, that we're able to do that year in and year out. And so we're excited about the opportunity to go find that right person. And you've heard me speak about it before, Paul. It's searches are journeys, and this won't be unlike any other search. It'll be a journey. There's certainly a lot of great candidates out there, and just early on, I think people nationally look at this as a really, really good baseball coach, and we've got great history here, great tradition, and we want to be able to build on that foundationally, and compete for conference championships, and play in regionals and super regionals, and make it to the College World Series.
Max, since you arrived a few years ago, you've hired a bunch of different coaches. I mean, a couple in football alone, a women's basketball coach, cross country, men's tennis. I mean, could go on and on. This will be your first baseball hire here in Waco. How unique is the baseball job in comparison to, let's say, hiring a football coach because of the scholarship situation and what all goes into that as a private school, but also the fact that, baseball rules could be changing somewhat. Is there a separate uniqueness to hiring a baseball coach versus maybe some of the others?
Yeah, Craig, that's a great question. And with baseball, you have 11.7 scholarships, right, to spread over your entire roster of 35, and so it's hard, particularly when you're at a private institution and your tuition is higher and total scholarship, total cost of attending is higher. And we're working on some ways to help with that. I think, what we're going to do with Alston and some other things, but it's a challenge. It's a uniqueness. But I would say that, when you think about just the state of Texas, and I think you could say this about maybe all sports, but it is a talent-rich state when we think of baseball, and I certainly believe there's more than enough prospective student athletes in the state of Texas, and that we'll hire somebody that has an understanding of that, and we'll be able to navigate that, and even maybe despite the scholarship challenge, be able to find a way to do that. And what I don't want to happen is that becomes an excuse for anybody to not recruit at the highest level. And I want to be clear. Steve never used that as an excuse, but we've got some uniqueness here, as everybody knows, and in terms of our Christian mission, our culture, the way we do it, and somebody that really knows and understands and appreciates and embraces that. And you spoke to it a little bit, but is there a day and time coming soon where the NCAA deregulates and potentially goes in a route where there's no equivalency sports or equivalency scholarships, that now all of a sudden it's permissive to provide full scholarships. There'll be a roster limit, but for example, roster limit 35, but you can give up to 30 full scholarships. And so, that's something that can potentially be on the horizon. And, Baylor will figure it out and find a way to navigate that and be able again to be nationally relevant in baseball. I've looked at video, and I've seen this. I've seen the ballpark where it's packed and signs and just high energy and all of that. And that's we want to be able to see that again. And I think Baylor baseball, there's a specialness to it, to our athletics program. Again, I mentioned great history, and we need to build upon that, and again, compete and play in regionals consistently, make it to super regionals, and then hopefully to College World Series.
Mack, a couple questions on the timeline right now. Obviously, it's the postseason for college baseball, and I would assume, even though you're not going to tell us any of the candidates and who they might be, that they would be participating in that right now. So when do you hope to have the search wrapped up by? Yeah,
so that's a great question, and Paul, I I was ready to give you the list of candidates and name one by one. Now that you've said that, I won't because you weren't. So, but yeah, it's fluid. Obviously, there's candidates that are competing, and there's some that are not, and so, again, wading through, what does it look like at the end of this weekend, and so we'll have a better sense of timeline. That doesn't mean that we haven't started. We think we're in a really, really good place when we think about names and candidates and, who we want to talk to, and doesn't mean that we won't get started, at some point in time this weekend. We've got that magical date of July 1 in the transfer portal, and for spring sports, you've got to be in the transfer portal by July 1 to be able to transfer and not sit out a year. And so we're cognizant of that. There's certainly some urgency to this, because I think uncertainty is really, really hard, and particularly on our student athletes, but we're not going to compromise quality and making sure we find the right person. And so, if that right person, or we believe strongly that right person is, somebody and their team continues to advance, then we'll have to manage and navigate that. So I haven't asked, or I haven't answered your question. Typically these searches, have taken 10 to 14 days. This one's a little bit different, or could be a little bit different, just because we're right in the thick of it with NCAAs and baseball. So we'll see where this lands.
Will facilities upgrades to baseball be any kind of part of it? Because you guys obviously willing to dive in facilities on everything, but baseball would seem to be one of the next things up down the line. Do you expect that to be something that would be kind of mentioned or brought up to any of the candidates, that like it is in the future of upgrading facilities where you would need them?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it. We started talking about it 2 or 3 years ago, and we've been able to do some smaller projects, whether it's upgrades to the locker room or pitching lab, and some of those things. And so we've always tried to have at least some projects going on in terms of baseball. Bigger things, whether that's a new clubhouse, et cetera. Those are things that we have talked about. Obviously, we've been focused, and I think rightly so. We've been focused on the pavilion. We've been focused on the football development center. But we have clearly talked about, along with the just redoing the Farrell Center to accommodate volleyball and A&T, and what do we do with Simpson with football? Baseball's been right there in terms of next big projects, and I think we have to create some excitement around the program. Obviously, we're gonna need to go out and raise money in order to do all of those things, but there's intentionality about doing all of that. And so, yes, I certainly foresee in the future us trying to do some things to enhance baseball facilities on a larger scale.
Mack, meetings going on in the Big 12, and obviously it's still a little bit of who's in, who's out, because it's just kind of a weird situation timeline-wise with Texas OU and then the 4 new schools and all of that. But, I mean, gosh, just today alone, I mean, there's the revenue figure, there's the hopes for a commissioner by, Big 12 media days and so on. But I guess we'll start with revenue. Obviously COVID took a hit out of everybody and took a bit of everybody's pie. But how did it feel to see the Big 12, see their revenue increase last season?
Yeah, no, I think we were all extremely extremely grateful to see the numbers. And of course, you know, we're in the process of budget, and so we knew those numbers. But for us to be back on track and the projected numbers, and for us to continue to be in a healthy place when you think about the other 4 Power Fives. And so I think that I don't know, I left. It's interesting. So I left the meetings candidly really, really excited about the future of the Big 12, and that it is viable, and it will continue to be viable, and I certainly even think more viable than what it is today when we think about the 5 autonomous conferences or the 5 Power Five. The Big 12 is going to be strong, and it's going to be relevant. And so left Dallas extremely excited. And then on the other hand, I also left Dallas really frustrated. Really frustrated in terms of the state of college athletics and where we are and trying to navigate all of this. And I think what's most frustrating is there's not a lot of answers, at our fingertips. I appreciate the great work that the members of the Transformation Committee are doing, and obviously Dr. Livingstone a part of that. Shane Lyons, the athletic director from West Virginia, also, and so Big 12 has 2 representatives, and so there's a lot of heavy lifting going on, but there's so much more to do, and just trying to figure out what membership levels are going to look like, and how we're going to potentially govern ourselves, what kind of new governance model. So there's a lot going on, and so I apologize for the long answer, but I am excited about the future of the Big 12. Well,
Mack, we had Jamie Pollard on the show the other day, and you know him well. He's a very passionate individual, and we talk to you all the time. You talk to him. We've talked to other athletic directors. It seems like everybody wants similar things, but not the same exact things. And the devil's in the details, and that appears to be where these things are going off the tracks. Am I wrong there?
Yeah, I think we all believe in the value of college athletics, and we get so distracted from it because of the money, quite frankly, and that's in many shapes and sizes, right? That's whether it's salaries, whether it's name, image, and likeness, whether it's Alston, whether all kinds of things. And fundamentally, we've got to find a way to get back to our foundation. I truly believe in the value of education, and that seems to just get lost in all of this. And when you think about the percentages of Americans that have a college education, and we're certainly providing that for many of our young people. Again, that just seems not to mean anything to anybody anymore. And so I think we need to go back. We need to go back to that. And then, how we navigate some of these other pieces, Paul, will be interesting. And, I think we're moving away from the days where the NCAA is going to navigate all of that because of antitrust. I think we're gonna get to a place where conferences are gonna have the autonomy to manage and dictate some of this, if not most of it. And so there will certainly be differences between the conferences and amongst the conferences, and what that's going to look like. Nobody knows it at this point in time, but I think if you fast forward a year from now, we'll certainly have a better idea. And so it's frustrating because there is a lot of commonality and there's a lot of shared vision in terms of what our core values are. But there's certainly just a lot of differences, even within the Power Five, let alone then the Group of Five and all Division I. And so how do you do that and make everybody feel good about it? And so that's the challenge. But hey, we'll find our way. Just because I'm frustrated today doesn't mean I'll be frustrated a year from now. We'll thread this needle and find the way.
Mack, one of the hottest topics, I guess, in college circles over the last week or two has been the elimination of divisions for those who want to, change up their championship game format. Everybody given the option, the autonomy to be able to, crown their champion the way that they want to. With the Big 12 kind of in this weird transition, as I mentioned earlier, and so many other issues on your plate, how much was any of that discussed amongst the topics that you guys addressed?
Yeah, and so we certainly talked in depth about football matters, football rules, etc. And when I mentioned that, right, transformation committee, modernization of rules, and so we talked about recruiting calendar and some other things in regards to football. We didn't dive deep. To be honest with you, into what the schedule will eventually look like, and whether or not the Big 12 will have divisions or one division. We've got that subcommittee, and it was really pushed to them, and obviously I'm fortunate and blessed to serve on that, but. When we were out in Phoenix for spring meetings, that that hadn't passed. It hadn't gone through the D1 Council, and now that it has officially, we'll get to work on it and see, what one division looks like, what that model looks like, versus what two divisions looks like. And again, right now we're just focused on the 23 football season and the 24 football season.
Right.
Whatever we do in 23-24 doesn't mean that that's exactly the way we're going to do it in 25. And I think, when we think about 25 and beyond, it's now 12 teams, it's new television partners, it's how many are in the CFP, is it 12? And so all of those, I think, will have a factor in terms of what conference schedule and whether it's one or two divisions beginning in 25 and beyond.
How much do you have interest in what the other conferences would do, or any kind of uniformity when it comes to a committee that seems to boil things down very basically? And if yours was determined to be somehow less than in their minds, would wind up having you out, like it happened with Baylor and TCU at the very beginning of the CFP. Do you look at what is the ACC doing, what is the SEC, the Big Ten, or do you just have to focus on you guys and that?
Yeah, I mean. I won't speak for the other four conferences, but I think, we certainly, have an idea and are interested in the other four. But when we're making the sausage, when we're in those meetings and we're having conversation and discussion, it's 90% on what truly is best for the Big 12. And as you can imagine, that's probably harder than normal right now, because we're going to be, we truly believe that we're going to be starting, a year from now, July 1 of 2023, we're going to be a conference of 14, and two members are going to be moving out. And so what's really best for the Big 12 when you've got 4 coming in and 2 moving out, and so that complicates it a little bit. It's a much clearer direction, I think, when you end up with the 12 members, and so. But we're gonna be focused on what's best for the Big 12.
Final thing from me, Mack. I saw Lawrence Shavanik talk about the potential announcement of a commissioner next month at Big 12 Media Days, which next month, that's crazy to think it's already almost here. But how are you feeling about the process and how it's gone so far?
Yeah, I think it's I think it's moving along like we all thought it would, and as you can imagine, there's great interest, and there's no doubt that we'll attract a great candidate, and and that candidate is going to be prepared to hit the ground running. There's a lot going on right now in college athletics, and there's a lot going on right now just within the Big 12.
All right, Mack, last thing for me, and I know you're hiring a coach. We talked about it. I know you said you were planning to tell me, but now I ruined it, so I'll learn my lesson this time. But do you have to filter your email when there is a coaching search open, because you'll just get random things, or people will stop you and say, who you should hire is this guy, so you don't have to fall into that well?
Yeah. So thank goodness for Lauren, but we create a baseball search email folder, and everything gets dumped into that, and we certainly are. I do receive a lot of emails with suggestions. Quite frankly, some of them are good suggestions, and some of them aren't so good. So and certainly text messages and all of that, and so we navigate and filter through that, right? And then we obviously have a starting place for us, just people that we're interested in, and as you could imagine, there's people on our list initially that we do hear from others, and they're recommending some of those same people, and then there's certainly a lot of names that come to us that maybe are not on our initial list.
Mack Rhoades, Baylor Director of Athletics. Mack, thanks so much for joining us, and I hope that we raised the level today without Smokey.
It was a much smoother, more efficient show. I don't know why, but it was. So appreciate you both. Have a great week.
All right, thanks, Mack. We'll talk to you soon. It's Mack Rhoades, Baylor Director of Athletics. I had to let him get a dig in at the end. Had to. Well, I mean, you should. 365 Radio, 365 Sports. Joey Kaufman, Columbus Dispatch, joins us now. And, Joey, before we get into Ohio State, you used to cover USC. So, I know that you left there and joined the big dude party, but do you feel like you might have missed the kind of the rock star show that's coming to USC now with Lincoln Riley?
I guess. I mean, it seems like they finally decided to act like a college football blue blood program. I was a few years early in covering them, but it's been a remarkable 180 to see what's going on in Southern California this offseason.
Yeah. Well, interesting comments from Ryan Day the other day, and I think this is the first time, if you take out the Nick Saban barbs at the end of his speech a couple weeks ago, it was kind of doing the same thing that Ryan Day did. Ryan Day just put a number on it of $13 million that he believes the Buckeyes need to stay competitive. This kind of sticks out in that I don't think I've ever heard a coach say the exact dollar number he's figured. And if Ohio State, and I know part of this is politicking and trying to spread panic to the fan base so they don't fall behind, but if Ohio State's worried about it, then shouldn't everybody be?
Well, I think this is really the point on the college football calendar historically, where it's sort of the booster circuit, it's the fundraising circuit, and before, I think we've seen all of that really go towards facilities and improvements to the weight room, a players' lounge, and now the pitch for coaches to boosters is the payroll, if you will. It's a case of, hey, we need to raise X amount of dollars and name, image, and likeness money that would be attainable for our players, or there's a risk that they would be plucked by another school elsewhere who is saying and whispering in the ear of a high school coach, a parent, or sliding in their DMs and saying, we'll offer you more NIL money. So I think this is what we're seeing with so many of these coaches now. I think, as you mentioned, the interesting part with Ryan Day is he's put a specific dollar amount, of sort of a fundraising goal, if you will, for Ohio State boosters and business folks around Columbus.
How would you say, because we've talked to various people from various programs, and there are some that will say, like, hey, the school needs to get its act together on NIL. Like, they're nowhere near they need to be, or they're behind the eight ball. I mean, I remember Ohio State was one of the first times I heard NIL because of Quinn Ewers a couple years back. But how would you say the program's kind of dealt with this? Have they been on the forefront of it? Have they been just in line with most? How do you feel about that?
I think they've been close to the forefront, but I think if you talk to boosters and people around Ohio State, there's a fear that they could slip a little bit behind the Texas and the Texas A&M. For a number of years, Ohio State had been really the school that had challenged Alabama for the recruiting title. It happened late during the Urban Meyer years and happened a couple just recruiting cycles ago, 2020 and 2021, where Ohio State was right by some boosters in Columbus. So that's kind of, those just launched this spring. So that's sort of where Ohio State is as far as the collectives and kind of the booster run groups.
Do you feel like there are recruits that have come in the last class specifically because of NIL? Because there A&M, nobody really knows, but I mean, there's the scuttlebutt about who it could be that came in because of NIL. Are there Ohio State players that think that is, because it's still Ohio State? People have always wanted to come play there and will always want to come play there.
Nothing really that's jumped out as far as a player who has really been able to come. I mean, Quinn Ewers is sort of a separate deal, but as far as the 2023 class or even late 22 class, I don't think a lot of those decisions were necessarily been swayed by NIL. You look at the top players Ohio State has been able to go after and get. It's been quarterback and it's been wide receiver, the two positions where you are almost guaranteed if you can get on the field and start, you're going to put up big numbers and have a chance to be a first-round pick. So I haven't really seen it yet with them where NIL really proved to be a major difference maker in the recruiting process, but I think the 2023 class is going to be the bigger tell, because it's you look at last year in 22, a lot of guys were in the fold and committed before NIL really became a factor in their recruitment. But this cycle, I think it's been a more of a talking point among high school players and the coaching staff.
Joey, what was the reaction to Ryan Day's new deal?
His contract extension, you mean?
Yeah, contract extension, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the timing of it is a little weird in Columbus circles, just because this is a year where, hey, they lost to Michigan, and that's supposed to happen. It hasn't happened in a decade. So I think it's maybe a reason why you saw his contract extension be announced in May instead of, or April, May, instead of like December or January or February of last year. Some distance always helps. But a lot of this is just due to Mel Tucker really resetting the coaching market. His $9.5 million year salary, now Ryan Day's in that $9.5 million contract. So I think for a lot of Ohio State fans, there's some disappointment of how last season went, and they want to see more from Ryan Day and his program moving forward. I mean, they've won one playoff game in his tenure. I think the expectation is to get back to the national championship game and win it. But I think there's also a point of pride in that Ohio State wants to pay its coach as much or more than anybody else in the Big Ten. It's been the standard bearer. It's been the flagship program for the league, and they want to have their head coach with a salary to match that.
Do you think NFL rumors will continue to follow him?
I think so, and I think just you look at the track record he has on the offensive side of the ball with the passing game, and that's certainly where the NFL's gone in that direction. You've seen with Sean McVay, and there's only a couple off-season cycles ago where that was so in demand, where everybody wanted a coach who could really engineer a passing offense like that. So I think because of that and because of his background in the NFL, it's always going to be something that's going to be lured in the background. And the interesting part will be if a team ever gives him a contract or gives him a contract where it's going to be able to match his Ohio State salary or more, because the more and more these guys start getting paid in college, the other side of the coin is there are very few NFL teams that offer you more than $9-10 million.
Yeah, I mean, I need to look up the NFL coaches' salaries actually and see even where those guys are, because I would imagine there's a good number of college coaches now making more than most. Maybe not like a Pete Carroll; he's probably still high, but yeah, I mean, $9 million. We're starting to get up there, Joey. Joey, on the recruiting side of things here in Waco, it was of interest that a couple of days ago, Ohio State offered a Baylor quarterback commit Austin Novosad. I know that Ohio State doesn't have a quarterback, I believe, in this upcoming class. Do you really keep track of that very much? And if so, your thoughts on, that's a school that when they offer a quarterback, people take notice. Your thoughts on them extending an offer to Austin Novosad?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he goes about his recruitment by Ohio State now that he's in the picture. Ohio State doesn't have a 2023 quarterback in the fold, and if he does reciprocate the interest from Ohio State, maybe wants to go here, he's going to be sandwiched between Devin Brown, who was a top recruit in the 2022 class, and Dylan Raiola, who's one of the top quarterback recruits in the 24 class. So if he comes, it's going to be quite a battle for the starting quarterback job. As we've seen with Ohio State, guys who have come and competed for a job and maybe not won out have been able to go elsewhere. Joe Burrow most notably, but even Jack Miller transferred to Florida, Quinn Ewers go to Texas. So I think the risk in going to Ohio State, and maybe you go to Ohio State, maybe you don't get on the field, is mitigated by the fact that, well, you can go to Ohio State and maybe you don't get to win the starting job, but you get a couple years of Ryan Day's tutelage under your belt and you go somewhere else and start. So I think that's kind of become a little bit of the way things have gone in Ohio State. And I think the transfer portal, eases some of the risk for these guys if they do decide to go to the Buckeyes.
Joey, Jim Knowles, the new defensive coordinator hired from Oklahoma State, and the knock on Ohio State last year was, in spite of their high flying offense and everything he'd do, they were pretty soft on defense, especially up front. How did you see that coming through the spring with improvements on defense or things that had changed? And was it a talent issue or a coaching issue alone, or was it a talent issue as well?
I think some of both. I mean, it's no secret that Ohio State's drop-off on defense has come without in the aftermath of 2019, where they had Chase Young and Jeff Okudah. Those guys were the number 2 and number 3 overall picks in the NFL draft, and they haven't really had that elite defensive end pass rusher since Chase Young. They haven't had a cornerback of the likes of Okudah. So they haven't had really the talent that they had in past years as far as that high end. But they also have kind of run a pretty basic defense and scheme. And the most interesting part about Knowles is how multiple he wants to be, how much he wants to disguise stuff, and how much he wants to put an offense off balance. It's always seen the last couple of years, Ohio State just sort of leaned into its talent on defense, which is great. When you have some of those really, really high-end NFL draft picks, but if you just have maybe some mid-round guys, it's not going to work. So I think Knowles is going to be a lot more creative in how he uses Ohio State's personnel.
How in the world does Jackson Smith and Jigba follow up that bowl game?
That's going to be really tough to do. I don't know if he's going to be able to do that quite as well, but that was certainly something.
Just for a point of reference, Baylor lost all their top wide receivers. Jackson Smith and Jigba's one game is that's what 300 yards more than they all have together in one game. The new ones that they're coming in, there's people who want a whole season that he did in that one.
Yeah,
game.
he had a huge performance. Yeah, and then Baylor has more yards in that bowl game. Your point than they have returning. Yeah,
exactly. It's
pretty
insane.
crazy.
Yeah, I stumbled over my words there. Thank you, Craig.
Yeah, no problem. Joey, Ohio State, Notre Dame to kick off the year. I know they just met a handful of years ago. Ohio State won that game when Urban Meyer was still at the helm. I did not realize how few times, though, these teams have played each other. What kind of excitement level is there? I know Ohio State plays big banger teams every single year in the non-conference and whatnot, but is there a little bit of spice, people looking forward to that Notre Dame matchup?
It's going to be a hot ticket because you're right. despite being in really neighboring states and being two of the Midwest powerhouses, they haven't played a whole lot in their history. And this will be the first time they've played on campus since the mid-'90s. They played the Fiesta Bowl in a couple of recent years, but this will be a home and home. Ohio State goes to South Bend next year, too. Then you also have the added factor, Marcus Freeman, Notre Dame's first-time head coach. He was a former linebacker at Ohio State and added a couple assistants with ties to the Buckeyes. Their defensive line coach is Al Washington, who was not retained last year as Ohio State's linebackers coach. And Marcus Freeman tried to poach some guys from Ohio State staff like Brian Hartline, who was rewarded with a pay bump as well and a promotion into the title of passing game coordinator. So it'll be interesting if there are any feelings that may be carried over from the hiring cycle. But I think that's going to be, I mean, you talk about Marcus Freeman, his first regular season game leading Notre Dame has to go into the horseshoe where he played as a player. I think that certainly that'll be quite a test out of the gate for him.
Yeah, no doubt. I wanted to ask you, too, before we let you go, man, there's so much talk now about the championship game rules being thrown to the wayside. Conferences can come up with their own way of doing things with divisions or pods or what have you. What are your thoughts on what the Big Ten ultimately does?
So my feelings are a little mixed because I think in some ways it's going to create, if the Big Ten gets rid of divisions, it's going to create some more equitable scheduling. If you're Indiana, if you're Rutgers, if you're Maryland, you've had a tough run these last 3 years where you have to play Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State on the schedule every year, Michigan State too. So that's going to help them out a lot. But I think the thing that's going to be, I think perhaps the biggest change for the Big Ten is Ohio State, Michigan have played the end of the year for forever, for decades and decades in college football. And without divisions, there's a very strong chance. Last year, for example, if you did not have divisions in the Big Ten, Ohio State would have played Michigan that last week in the regular season, and then we would have had a rematch the following week for the Big Ten title. And what makes that rivalry so great is everything that those teams are playing for, the Big Ten title game, a spot in the playoff or a national championship is on the line. So if there's a rematch the week after for a conference title game, does that take some of the luster out of that regular season rivalry? I think that's potentially a pretty big change in sort of the flavor of Ohio State, Michigan.
Joey Kaufman, the Columbus Dispatch. Joey, thanks so much for hopping on with us today.
Hey, good talking with you guys.
Always great to talk to Joey. He's our man in Columbus.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting times up there, to hear that the Ryan Day rumors won't stop. I guess you can just kind of lump them in that Matt Campbell group of no matter what you sign, no matter what you pledge or what you say at a press conference, people are always going to still be looking to poach you or assuming that you're going to be poached by somebody. I mean, maybe even Dave Aranda could be thrown in there as well after all the teams that were apparently linked to him last year. But certainly Matt Campbell and Ryan Day fit that bill. I guess James Franklin too, just in terms of guys are like, they can commit all they want, but you're still going to always wonder if they're really going to stick around for as long. So I can see why he would be in high demand, but it got to make you feel a little bit better that, he at least put pen to paper. Although, again, it doesn't necessarily matter in the long run. But, yeah, I mean, Ohio State –
Shaheen, former senior vice president, the NCAA, with us on Wednesday's Sikkim 365 Radio, 365 Sports. But just a couple more questions that we'd like to get to you, Greg, with all your experience and insight. One of them was, the NCAA seems to take all the hits, but should they be the ones taking the hits or the NCAA member schools?
Well, in a way, it's one and the same. That's also part of the problem. You have the NCAA as a convenient scapegoat where it is primarily the common ground where the membership comes together and they're supposed to form rules. And, ironically, not unlike the government in a way, you have all the different schools, different conferences, different divisions even, and then the different sports within them, the different interests within them. And there should be ways to get some of the most complex problems solved. But the trick really is that process takes not only both time, but really clear, cohesive leadership, both from the members and from the national office. So it's a challenge. And you can tell when it's not happening because things really hit neutral. The other problem of interest to many of your listeners is the fact that with the college football playoff really being handled obviously by the entity out of Dallas. But the NCAA has a very limited role as it relates to football. So anything as it relates to Division I football, now thinking to Gene Smith's comment from a couple of weeks ago about the possibility that really maybe FBS football, maybe the CFP divisions should really self-patrol as a group and maybe work through the organization in Dallas. It's tough because it really requires, the answer to your question is it requires everybody. It requires the institutions and all the people that go into it. I mean, by the way, including the academic wing. It requires the conferences to pull those institutions together, and then it requires the conferences as their representative at the national level in the NCAA to move the ball along and to try and serve common interests. But it just takes so long, and it is very difficult to get everybody on the same page, in part because there's competition on the field and competition off the field. So when a particular conference proposes something, the feeling really relates to the fact that others tend to wonder, okay, now I wonder why they're proposing that, and what edge will that give them? And then it tends to get overthought, and it's hard to get things done.
When July 1st of last year occurred and things all changed dramatically, I asked you what your phone is like on occasion. So was that a day when you had just more people than you could imagine texting you saying, well, you told them?
Yeah, I mean, including, by the way, student athletes or former student athletes who I had worked with during the time. And my point really had been, along the way, and by the way, I really didn't fight it. I was often in conversations alone, but there were a number of people ultimately who, as time went on, got to see all of this and started to understand the broader implication. It just didn't wind up being enough people. But yeah, I mean, and the bottom line is, it would be easy to say, for those who figured it out, to say, told you so. The problem is that it still doesn't make for easy answers. There are real implications to all of this. First of all, the ethics of it, and that's a complicated question. When you have collectives that are very structured, formal, and so forth, that are handling a lot of the likeness business. Okay, well, that's one thing if they can demonstrate that they've got everything buttoned down. But across 350 plus institutions, you're going to have, we obviously have a number of entities that are in the space that who knows what they're doing. And and then it became ironic in the last 90 days to all of a sudden hear and read, well, we need to look into all of these deals as they're happening, because I don't know exactly what we expected. I mean, if you literally say to your institutions, follow your state law if you have one, otherwise here are the minimum standards. I don't know exactly how we were, expecting things to go. This is the kind of, I guess, disorganized chaos that can happen when there's not a thought-through structure that works for everyone.
If, in fact, let's just say 10, 15 years ago, the NCAA had come to the table and found a way for students to be compensated other than what right now I guess is the scholarship or cost of living or cost of whatever that is, and of course there's more things into that now as well. But had they done that 10 or 15 years ago, heck, 6 or 8 years ago, 5 years ago, would that have been enough to at least push this back where we are now another 5 or 10 or 15 years? Or would the student athlete and attorneys just been, no, now you've given in, we're going to get more?
Well, obviously the devil's in the detail, but again, and I was often accused of pie in the sky thinking on this, but I believed, and I believe that student athletes should absolutely be at the table while this was being worked through. I think there were too many meetings that involved university presidents that didn't involve the direct voice of student athletes. And in fairness to the NCAA, there's student athlete representation now in their senior-most boards, and they do deserve credit for that. But the important thing is that you can't have, and I say this having sat in the room and witnessed it, you just can't have a collection of 12, 15, 18 largely white, largely, men, largely in their 60s, maybe 70s, talking about what teenagers need or have interest in or going to be attracted to for guidelines to enrich their overall lives, to pursue the full benefit of what a college experience has to offer. It just doesn't happen. It's very difficult to find those who are well informed. If they had listened, if they had really kind of paused, and that was hard to do, by the way, always in a contentious legal environment, who knows what might have happened. But in a fair structure where the different constituencies could have collaborated and really thought this through, there's no doubt in my mind that solutions could have existed. There have been harder challenges, and I think there really were opportunities there.
We have on our show, and I'm sure this has been used many times before, that term guardrails. Like there are no guardrails. This is wide open. The transfer portal was supposed to be, something that looked like maybe the combination of that, NIL, and COVID. COVID opened up an extra year. It was a one-time transfer, and now even that waivers are being challenged all the time. Do you see them being able to put together anything that would be guardrails? And if you would have been able to do that, if they would have come to you and say, okay, we're going to do this, what guardrails do you think would have been fair to both sides?
Well, again, you have to have the various stakeholders at the table. You have to have the student athletes. You have to have the institutions. You have to have sponsors. People who would be very interested in these sorts of things, how this could work. And there's a question, there's an element of this that we haven't talked about yet. And it comes up from time to time in various special interest discussions, and that is the unionization of college student athletes. There are benefits to a collective bargaining model where it doesn't, where there's already a built structure for how this works. And you see it admittedly in the professional models, but you also see it in non-athletic models. The same sort of thing. There's the opportunity to recognize performance, recognize talent, reward it, and to do so and to provide kind of a defined channel to be able to do that. The issue is always that you cannot prescribe, in my opinion, by the way, you cannot prescribe rules without truly walking in the shoes or having all of the stakeholders involved. And that really is the issue that, in my mind, has never been overcome in all of this. And I think it is the biggest challenge. The transfer portal element comes from years of litigation and challenge to, just unthinkable and unnecessary restraint on the movement of student athletes who were dissatisfied. Whether they weren't getting enough playing time. By the way, student athletes have bad school fits as well. They need to go somewhere else, and to keep that all in mind. Meanwhile, the the coaches and so forth, can go freely to any institution they want. So, in my mind, the transfer portal is the perfect example of why you can't avoid having these difficult conversations and finding solutions, because without it, solutions will be found, but they'll be forced upon it. And truly, the transfer portal is one of these things where it has been, open up the barn doors and let everything go. And it really is, it's really troubling, because if we are truly about what's in the best interest of the young people who participate, it really should be about getting them the best possible information. We shouldn't have kids that are falling out, leaving to go to the draft, regardless of what the sport is, by the way, and not having enough information to know whether or not they're going to get selected. We have to have the opportunities to authenticate that information, to make sure that we don't give bad information to young people who, without it, really, limit their opportunities. You just have to be, to me, it's such a clear thing, complicated in the details. There's no question about it. But if you really recenter it and say, okay, we all say we're about the young people and their experience. If that's truly the case, then that should guide us on how we come up with the solution.
So the CBA, if in fact there was a unionization or whatever, would the student athletes or whoever represented them even want that now? Because wouldn't they have to then give something back? With right now, they don't have to give much back at all.
Perfect question, because you really have, you're exactly right. So now we're in this kind of post litigation scenario, which is really pre-litigation scenario, I suppose, by the time we get done with it, because you're going to have those sorts of challenges. But what you have to do is you have to help educate everybody, because the challenge here is we've got so many different sports. The NCAA sponsors 90-plus championships. You've got the CFP and so forth. You've got all these different sports at all these different levels. You've got the Title IX implications. So you have all these other standards. You have the fact that there are, all these other sports outside of football, basketball, baseball, softball, and a handful of other championships that simply are, they're the Olympic sports. They often don't have, they're not financially positive and so forth. And you can't do anything that's going to restrict the livelihood or the opportunities for those young people. So that's exactly right. It's a perfect question, because that, to me, was the ultimate incentive of why we needed to get it done before litigation or just the wear and tear of trying to come up with a solution would pull everybody apart. The issue is, and if you look at it over the last 50 years, think about all of the major issues in college athletics. When you've gotten everybody in the room, when they can't come together on it, think CFP expansion recently, it winds up with such far-reaching implications that I think within a matter of time, any of the stakeholders that were in the room or will reflect on that and realize the mistake that's been made, because all it does is further throw off the imbalance and increase the list of challenges that you have. So you're exactly right. So now what it would take to do a collective bargaining agreement would be educating. And by the way, that's just one of many solutions. But the idea of it is it makes sure that there's a baseline of everybody being taken care of. And then, just like you do in professional athletics, you can have structures that allow for, additional opportunities, additional compensation for various student athletes based on whatever standards would be identified.
Let me ask you this, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but the NCAA used to have, an iron fist. And then they realized they had an iron fist, and then they started believing in it probably too much. But there are also cases of teams, schools, programs, whatever, that have broken the rules. And it seemed like there's some givens. Like what they tried to do to Penn State, they lost that in court. What they tried to do to North Carolina, they lost that in court. Do you ever remember any kind of conversations whatsoever where they said, well, we can't? And there have been some big boy schools who have been hammered. Was that? Are they almost now to the point where do you feel like they're toothless? And have they ever we can't hammer them because they're program XYZ blue blood?
Well, let me qualify this by saying, because I was on the championship side and had to, focus on those, that there was an internal wall with enforcement. Obviously, I spoke with and would regularly see, the lead folks in enforcement, but there was a very careful wall there in some ways. So, in a certain way, I'm probably speculating more on this question, than others. But with that in mind, I can say this with a clear conscience, being in the room. The NCAA never pulled. The NCAA, for its investigative authority, did not pull off of any case because of who was being investigated. In my time, I can say. It was just never a discussion. It was never a consideration. It just you can't do that. Mm-hmm. Now, at the same time, there are so many issues, so many investigations, so many cases going on at any one point in time to a certain extent. So many schools are involved of every size. But, I think there's a lot to be learned from some of the more major cases. But the reality is, again, and you always will read this in litigation about the NCAA, it's a voluntary membership organization. And so this is what the schools have all agreed to do. And among the things that they cannot do is they don't have subpoena power. So think of the January 6th committee in Washington, D.C., right? They have subpoena power, and they still can't get, some of the people to come and testify. The NCAA doesn't even have subpoena power. So you're relying on the good faith of individuals, organizations, institutions to be forthcoming when a problem has been identified. And it's just not easy to do. It's just, again, as you know, every alum of every institution is passionate for their institution, and they're absolutely convinced that their school is either not doing anything wrong or anything they're doing is what everybody else does. And they're also convinced that everybody else is doing far greater sins or committing far greater sins than they are. And so it is just, it is a business that if you're not careful, if you don't kind of bring people together with the right kind of commonality, it chews itself up. And in my opinion, having been very deeply in it, and then kind of working now on the outsides with institutions and so forth, I really do believe that that's what's happened here. You have an industry, a business that, despite its rampant success, it's chewing itself up. Conference realignment of institutions, especially below the FBS level, it just doesn't make any sense. It's fascinating to watch, but I've been involved in many of those transactions or researching many of those transactions, doing the feasibility. And those schools, those institutions think they're moving on to another conference that's going to give them some dramatic benefit, and it very rarely, in my mind, pans out. There may be a better fit geographically, that can make sense, certainly, but if you're really looking at very similar conferences, the kind of moving of the chess pieces below the real revenue conferences at the FBS level, very, very hard to see the justification in it, but I think it is a reflection of what's going on in the industry these days.
Greg, again, Shaheen with us, former senior vice president with the NCAA. One more question about the NCAA. Then I want to get the connection with you, Scott Drew, Isaiah Austin, and Baylor as well, which is a great story.
Sure.
Can you see the NCAA just not even being around in a couple of years?
Well, there will always have to be some organization, and I don't know that starting from scratch makes a whole lot of sense. I do think this transformation committee, that Commissioner Sankey and Julie Cromer, the athletic director at Ohio, are chairing. Those are two really serious people that have encyclopedic knowledge of how this should all work, how it works, and how it should work, I should say. I think it will be very interesting to see what they come out with. I'm pessimistic regarding the August timeline of when a lot is to be unveiled. But I am mindful. But what I would expect is at that point we'll have some insight on things. I think it will take a little more time. It's a very important chance because of who's involved in it. Because I don't think those two individuals get involved in anything without it having a real serious shot of making some progress. The issue is really going to come down to presidential leadership and embracing of what's really needed. And I'll say this with all due respect to university presidents who are, very important in our nation. University presidents have an important role to play in intercollegiate athletics as part of the institution. But if they get too much into athletics, in my opinion, and over the last 25 years, by design, they've been pulled deeply into intercollegiate athletics. I think it's gone too far because the distance between their offices, their desks, their roles, and the student athletes it's really too much. So how that affects the NCAA means, again, is this transformation committee going to lead to real change in addressing some of these tougher issues and mechanisms that become more realistic so that people spend less time trying to figure out whether the grass is greener, as they look at every other institution or every other conference, and realize that where they are, they have to work together to try and commit to solutions, because if they do so, it can benefit everybody rather than it just furthering the imbalance between institutions.
For some that don't know, and probably quite a few that don't, you had mentioned this to me earlier in the day on Wednesday about the connection. Scott Drew, June of 2014, Isaiah Austin, who had the story of not being able to play in the NBA because of his condition, his health condition. That you apparently had a lot to do with that moment when he was drafted in so many ways by the NBA. Can you kind of give me some background on that?
Absolutely, and in fact, it ties to what we've been talking about in a way, because for the longest time, the NBA and the NCAA were estranged. They were basically equal stakeholders in USA basketball, the Olympic entity, national governing body. But for the first several years I worked at the NCAA, I was really not allowed to contact and work with individuals at the NBA. It just didn't happen. They were the enemy. Miles Brand changed that, and I had proposed to him that I thought I needed to reach out and I needed to get to know people. I've become really good friends with Adam Silver, who then was the deputy commissioner and obviously now is the commissioner. Is just one of the most solid human beings I've ever met. He's incredible. And we are dear friends, kind of on and off the court, dealt with a lot of issues, worked on a number of initiatives. We take this seriously. We share the love for basketball. He's a big college basketball fan, and I'll confess to enjoying the NBA and in certain doses, and just love how they operate as an organization, as an entity, on a number of different levels, and I credit a lot of that to Adam. But Coach Drew had reached out to me when all of this news had happened with Isaiah, and I want to say it was within maybe in the 10 days just before the draft. I mean, it was obviously this was late breaking as he had gone through the physicals and so forth in terms of the diagnosis. And literally speaking, it was one text with Adam, and he called me within 25 minutes, and it was done. I mean, we didn't need to connect any of the dots. Adam's response was, absolutely, we will do something. Let me work on it. And within a very short period of time, the NBA did as the world saw, and honestly, then I got to know Commissioner Stern. Commissioner Stern, who had a tough veneer, was equally sensitive. This was very much in the ilk of something he would have done as well. But Adam really designed all of that, and I know that Adam offered him a job if he'd finish his education, which my understanding is he's done, and is now working with the NBA. And that's what it's all about. Coach Drew and I remain in really very regular contact. He wrote me in the last day about the article, and during the tournament and so forth, we share barbs back and forth. And being from Indiana and his Valpo roots and so forth, it's a nice story, and he's been very kind to me. He stayed in touch, and I have enjoyed his success that I think is richly deserved. And most important of all in that story is that Isaiah was recognized for really some extraordinary talent and about as good of a solution as could come up under what was very difficult circumstances.
It was awesome.
Special young man, and it was very moving. I'm just thinking about it and getting shivers, thinking about how powerful a moment it was, because and again, all credit goes to Coach Drew for reaching out to me, and to my friend Adam Silver, who really just took it and ran with it and made sure it was just handled in a very special way.
Not a surprise, Coach Drew. He is one of a kind. I know, and Greg, it's awesome. That story. I'm glad Seth wrote the story. I really am. He did a great job with it, because there's been a couple of them. The Joe Moglia story, where you and I, we spoke about that on Wednesday, and some of his ideas, and then also the story about you. And it's great to have you on our show. We appreciate the insight. We might every once in a while want to come back and pick your brain, if you don't mind.
Hey, whatever brain's left, it's yours. So just let me know, and I'd be glad to do it. It was a real honor to catch up with you, and hope we can do it as often as you'd like.
Former Senior Vice President of the NCAA, Greg Shaheen, with us, Sikkim 365 Radio and 365 Sports.
Parenting is full of...
Back on Tuesday. Max Olson of The Athletic joins us now. And Max, since we've spoken to you since last week, you wrote a great column on re-ranking the class of 2018. And I was surprised to see that Texas didn't really fall that far in spite of their overall results and getting and a coach got fired in those 4 years.
Yeah, it's true. This is a re-rank that we do every year around signing day, and we updated it this week with the results from the NFL draft, which didn't really change the rankings a lot. And that's Georgia still had the best class in 2018 by far, and just a ton of draft picks, obviously 14 in that class. But yeah, Texas is one of those where kind of like they got a lot of starters out of their 2018 class, a lot of guys that are still there and will start again this year. But, would you say they've got like first round picks in that class? No, they don't. And that was a class that was a top 5 class for Tom Herman, and certainly raised expectations there. And, there's some good players like DeMarvion Overshone who are still there, who have a chance to, to help their stock. And Joseph Osai obviously had a really good year in 2020. But, Texas is one of those kind of mixed bags a little bit where, the guys either started or left basically. And the ones who started, pretty good players, not a ton of all-conference players in that class.
And Max, looks like the playoff teams, I mean, you look at the re-rankings, it's basically the college football playoff, isn't it?
Yeah, that's not intentional, but that's kind of how it works out, right? I mean, I think that's still – it's funny because we talk so much when I talk to you guys about transfer portal and who's going where and all this stuff, but I think at the end of the day, it's still pretty important to have a veteran team and have a team full of guys that you've developed for a couple of years. And in this case with the rankings, the one that really stood out was Cincinnati, just a terrific class by Luke Fickell and his staff. It goes to show you just what they can do in terms of development. Obviously Clemson did well because, this is the class that had Trevor Lawrence in it. And, he took them all the way very early on in his career. But, this is, Michigan is one that a lot of people probably would have been disappointed by Michigan's class on signing day in terms of where it ranked. But, they signed Aiden Hutchinson and a lot of great players that, built a playoff team. So that's kind of where, we're trying to judge, how did you retain them? How did you develop them? How many of them really started and made a big impact for you? And those are some of the schools that did really well.
You had Baylor 14th on the re-rank, and they were 29th in 2018 initially. So developing players, that's what Matt Rule and Dave Aranda have done over the last couple of years. Was there anybody who, when you started doing the math, like just really jumped out at you?
Well, it's funny because Baylor is one of those classes that did move up this week because, Tyquan Thornton got drafted higher than I probably expected back in February. And that just goes to show you, I mean, you knew obviously those guys were going to light it up at the combine, but, it makes a ton of sense, obviously, that class grades out really well just in terms of, their ability to, play for 2 Big 12 championships. And certainly we saw they took Matt Rule and those guys took the right approach in terms of the kind of athletes they were looking for. And Dave Aranda did a great job of keeping those guys too, because a lot of times when these classes go through, coaching change in the middle of their careers, that's usually when you see at a lot of these schools, these guys go bail and go play somewhere else. And that's a credit to Baylor that they were able to hold on to those guys and keep winning with that class.
So, Max, we were talking just a few minutes ago about the other article on The Athletic, Nicole Auerbach and who was it? Chris Vanini. We're reviewing the coaching carousel and kind of giving our own thoughts on that as well. Is there a hire that sticks out to you that if you had to put your next paycheck, like this is the hire in the program I have the most confidence in, and then one on the opposite end of the spectrum of you're like, I don't know, like I'm not sure about this one. Is there an example of both those for you from this past carousel?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think that I'm pretty, I don't know, maybe I'm being naive, but I'm pretty optimistic that it's going to work out for Mario Cristobal. Obviously, it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take pretty crazy level of recruiting, but we've also seen him do that at Oregon. I'm not saying Miami's, going to win a national title in the next 5 years, but I do think he's kind of man, and I guess we've seen some of these lately, right, where you say it's the perfect hire and they didn't go right, but that's kind of in terms of getting him and Clemson's AD in at the same time and really investing in it. I think that one's going to do pretty well. Honestly, I do. And then you asked me what one's going to kind of bust. I don't know. What stands out to you guys?
I don't know. Like I'm not sure how. I think Brian Kelly will do well at LSU, but I don't know if they're going to get out of him what they wanted to.
I think it's the weirdest one for sure. And even if you ask. And I've had that conversation with other Power 5 coaches this spring when you go visit them. Like, what'd you think of that? And they're just like, what's he doing? What was he like to leave Notre Dame as the all-time winningest coach and just go chase? Maybe is it about chasing the national championship? Is it kind of chasing more pay and prestige and all that? I don't know. That one will never not baffle me. And then, man, if you're talking about that cycle too, like just Auburn not making a change is also crazy.
Yeah, especially what do they do? Like they turn around, especially they're mad, or there's plenty of people that are mad at Brian Harsin, and if they turn out to be right, they've waited another year.
Well, it's like what we saw, USC this last year, right? I mean, how many games can Auburn lose before they're firing the coach and maybe firing the AD too, right? I mean, so it feels like it's such a short leash, and it's one of those things where. Look, I'm not saying it's right for them to fire Brian Harsin after year one. I don't think that makes a lot of sense, but clearly a lot of people are out on him. And so you really wonder, how, unless he just wins a lot of games this year, how is that situation really going to improve here in the next 12 months?
Yeah, that was a great. Both articles we've talked about so far have been really good stuff, really entertaining read. So hats off to everybody involved, and I'm gonna go back and read through that again tonight, just because there's some very interesting comments to pick up on. But Max, you've also been very busy throughout the last few months, monitoring, looking at, and reporting on the transfer portal. When we had you on last week, it was like boom, the big announcement had finally come in, and you had to go. Understandably, Jordan Addison to USC, and I know there's you had a post just a few hours ago, Diamante Tucker Dorsey from James Madison heading to Texas, and I know USC picked up another guy. But first things first, just your thoughts in the immediacy and now the last few days about the shockwave that was Jordan Addison finally ended up in Southern Cal.
Yeah, it feels like this transfer portal cycle is kind of done now. All the big names are really off the board here at this point. Other than maybe Charlie Jones from Iowa going in the portal the other day, which is surprising. I think we'll see some players try and go in the portal now and try to get an exception as a grad transfer. We'll see how many people try to do that, but certainly Jordan Addison is it's fascinating. I'm not surprised it turned out that way, given he was linked to USC really from the start of that whole field before he even appeared in the portal. But that is they've gone out and added 4 wide receivers. Starting caliber wide receivers from the transfer portal this offseason with him, Mario Williams from OU, Brennan Rice from Colorado, and then Terrell Bynum from Washington. So, that whole offense, other than maybe up front, that whole offense has totally been rebuilt through the portal. How quickly does it click? It's something we've never really totally seen before in terms of just building a brand new thing from scratch there on one side of the ball, and really a lot of it on defense too. So, I think it's going to take USC more time. I do. I don't think we should be talking playoffs with them this year, but certainly I think probably the fan expectation is going to be very high very quickly there.
How are you dealing with the emotional trauma we've all felt from the Jimbo Fisher Nick Saban war a week later?
Yeah, it's. I guess that's over too. That's a little sad as well. Yeah, It's wild. It's wild. I mean, there's just not. You really, honestly, I can't think of many other things you can really compare it to in terms of just nobody ever goes at Nick Saban like that. No one does. I mean, even the people that have worked with him. I mean, especially those guys. They always sort of treat him with deference, and so to see that, I don't know. I saw that Alabama picked up a commitment from Eli Holstein, who was committed to Texas A&M in the past. I'm sure the recruiting battles between those two schools are going to be pretty terrific here from now through February.
And so now, Max, it's what all eyes on Arch Manning, right?
That's right. Yeah, and he's going to take official visits this summer. I think he's still taking his time a little bit. Still not sure what to do, but it does certainly seem like, as much as Alabama probably did want Arch Manning, that they had to pull the trigger on somebody eventually. But I think this is going to be Georgia versus Texas, and certainly two very different situations. One program, coming off a losing season, the other coming off a national championship, and is it kind of the sales pitch of Stark's offense and all the guys that maybe they can put around him in the scheme that gives Texas the edge, or is it Georgia sort of being able to sell that, hey, they're going to get great recruits and they're going to certainly stay in the playoff race. I'm fascinated to see kind of what wins out for him.
Max Olson of The Athletic. Max, enjoy the holiday weekend. Thanks for hopping on with us today.
Thanks, Phil.
All right. Max Olson of The Athletic. Oh, couldn't get there. He's fast, man.
He's ready to go enjoy Memorial Day weekend.
That's right. That's right. But yeah, that's interesting to hear his thoughts on the coaches. I do. I wonder about Brian Kelly. I think he'll do fine. I just don't know if he'll be able to do what they're paying him to do, which is win natties.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question. I mean, that's, we all can only give our thoughts right now. And, there's not a lot of those hires that were made, even though there was many of them that you go oh, I don't know about that one. So you really got to kind of sit there and think about it. But he's just the one that comes to mind because it's just a weird fit. It just is. And it was from the very beginning and has remained that way, even though he's settled in a little bit. But, yeah, I mean, he's obviously going to have a big microscope, but a lot of these guys are, Billy Napier at Florida and Riley at USC, and the list goes on and on and on. And, again, like I said a little while ago, it'll be fascinating to see the retrospective that's done inevitably, kind of like the recruiting class thing that they did. But inevitably the Athletic or some other outlet or all of them will write an article here in a couple years re-ranking the coaching carousel. And I have no idea what that's going to look like. You could tell me any of the number of coaches that were hired could be on the top of that list, Napier or McGuire or whoever. And I couldn't say you're a liar because, I mean, we don't know right now. So, yeah, it'll be very interesting here these next couple of years to see how this historical cycle really shook out and what kind of shockwaves it sent through the rest of college football at a very unique time in the sport.
All right, we'll take a break right here. Sports Pages on YouTube. Matt Fortuna of The Athletic joins us now. Matt, I really enjoyed the column that you did with Bruce Feldman on the kind of rising and falling coaches or the potential for that. How did you start out trying to get a temperature on that? Because no matter, sometimes, you can talk to other coaches, you can talk to people in the know, but depending on who you talk to, it's hard to get a really accurate reading of the actual temperature of someone's job.
Yeah, definitely. I think, these are year-long daily conversations that Bruce, myself, and others in this business are having with people throughout, whether it's coaches, administrators, agents, search firms, you name it. And just so that you're always, plugged in, for lack of a better term. So you always have your finger on the pulse and you have a sense for which way the wind's blowing, what one coach may need to do to up his profile a little bit and maybe get a better job, what another coach may need to do to save his job going into what's a potentially critical year. So, every situation is, as we all know, anyone who's covered the sport knows, is ridiculously unique, right? I mean, you see some coaches get fired and you scratch your head and wonder, what does that school think they're going to get out of their football program? And you see others who keep their jobs despite losing seasons after losing seasons or get extended after not so great seasons. That makes you scratch your head in another manner as well. So you just try to keep this as an ongoing conversation. And when push comes to shove, whether that's when changes are being made, or in our case when we're writing about what changes could possibly come a few months from now. You want to have as complete a picture and most accurate information as possible.
A couple of the jobs you mentioned in the Big 12 in this article on The Athletic, Iowa State, is this as much of a head-scratcher, Matt Campbell still being in Ames after all this time? Yeah, right.
I mean, when you look at how crazy last year was in terms of the number of coaching changes, you look at just how highly valued and spoken of Matt Campbell is, even after last year, which wasn't the best year for Iowa State on the field by any stretch of the imagination. It's crazy to think that he's still there. And outside of USC, it, to my knowledge, did not get any serious run at another place. And part of that is him, too. And by that, I mean, look, I don't think the guy's looking to get out of Ames. I think he's built a foundation there that he's very proud of and hopes to continue to grow. And I don't think he's a guy who would just take any other job for the sake of a bigger paycheck or a bigger profile. I think he's very strategic and deliberate in how he goes about his business. That being said, yeah, pretty much every shape or type of program had an opening last year, right? Big, small, blue blood, not blue blood, private, public, you name it. And outside of USC, none of them got all that far down the road with him, from my understanding. So it is surprising, but hey, those other schools have lost as Iowa State fans have gained, because they got another year with one of the best coaches in the sport.
You also mentioned West Virginia, and we have a lot of West Virginia fans that watch and listen to our show, Matt, and they, I would say they have varying levels of opinion on Neil Brown, but I don't think that that's true. I think that this is very much a put up or shut up year for him, and obviously with the new offensive coordinator and Graham Harrell and JT Daniels and all that, like he realizes this, and the Big 12 is probably unpredictable. How do you see Neil Brown putting the angst to rest?
Yeah, I think he needs a strong season. And by that, I mean what you said. I mean, there's a sense of unease among that fan base right now, among people in Morgantown. It hasn't been bad, just hasn't been good. It's been kind of meh, right? And I know things get exacerbated in 2022 with the transfer portal because more players around the country are leaving their schools than ever before. But I think the combination of the exodus there, the combination of some of the losses, I think the profile he came in with, having such a strong performance at Troy, going 31-8 over his final 3 years, winning at LSU a couple of years ago. I think this was thought of in real time as a home run hire. I know I thought of it that way. I thought this was the perfect guy for the perfect job. And again, it hasn't gone poorly. It just hasn't gone great. And we've seen coaches get fired for less, so to speak. So I definitely think this is a put up or shut up year for him in that regard. I do think, for better or for worse, that opener against Pitt, who I'm still not sure how good or bad they'll be, especially now with Jordan Addison out of the picture. I just think with the renewal of a rivalry on that Thursday night of opening weekend, it's such a strong opportunity to make a big first impression on 2022, both good or bad.
We got some scheduling announcements, Matt. It's kind of like the next chapter in that long summer grind. We'll have media days here pretty soon and, all that jazz. Obviously notable the Texas around in these parts, that Texas-Alabama kickoff being earlier in the day. I know there's been some kind of back and forth on that, but a lot of other matchups. What kind of jumped off the page to you, if anything, from these scheduling announcements?
Yeah, I mean, in your backyard, it's not Big 12 country anymore, but Miami, Texas A&M, 9 Eastern time in Week 3 on ESPN. That one is late. Lincoln Riley's USC debut is going to be on the Pac-12 network against Rice. I know that league needs to do everything it can to pump up its own product, its own network, but given that no program has been talked about more this offseason, there is more a mystique or intrigue about it than USC. I don't get the Pac-12 network. Most people I know don't get the Pac-12 network. I don't know if that changes between now and September 3rd, but if it doesn't, it looks like a lot of us will not get a chance to see Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams during their debut together in Southern California. This was more of a local one here, but Notre Dame playing Navy on ABC or ESPN at noon. That game has been on CBS as long as I could literally look up, which was to 1998, and I believe it went back even further. As far as when it's a Navy home game, obviously the home games for Notre Dame have been on NBC, but that's a big group for ABC and ESPN. No big noon kickoff in Week 1. I figured when there was the Joe Buck trade, I don't know if you remember that, when basically Fox let Joe Buck out of his contract a year early to go to ESPN, they got as a bonus kind of a rights of first pick in the college football draft. And apparently they took Penn State Purdue for that Thursday night game. And I don't know if Notre Dame Ohio State that weekend was not available to them for some contractual reason, because I'd have to imagine that's going to be the biggest game of opening weekend, especially when you consider that that's Marcus Freeman's debut and he's going up against his alma mater at Ohio State. So there's not a whole lot of other games that would make sense from a Fox standpoint in that big noon category for that opening weekend, but I was surprised nonetheless to see them not have a big noon game that Saturday. Ireland, another local one for me, not that Ireland's local, but Northwestern playing Nebraska is going to be 12:30 Eastern time in week 0. That's 5:30 Ireland time, whatever time zone that is, for the locals there. But again, the most recent Ireland games we've seen have all been at 7:30, 8:30, 9 a.m. Eastern time. Now those were all in traditional week 1 Saturday mornings and not in their own essential window in week 0. But guess we got to wait 5 extra hours for the college football season to start than we previously thought we would because it can't get here soon enough. But there's always a few fan bases that are going to feel jilted by announcements like these. There are always going to be a few head scratchers, but there's so much fine print with these TV deals that most of us aren't even privy to as far as how business gets done when it comes to picking which teams play in which broadcast windows.
Matt, Notre Dame has started to make waves this offseason. Right now, they currently have the number 1 ranked recruiting class, and obviously we have a long way to go for that. But one of the things said about Brian Kelly, and he kind of said was kind of mutual out the door, was he had kind of said, "Look, I've gone as far as I can go at Notre Dame, and there's some." There's things that are kind of a ceiling for recruiting there. And Marcus Freeman doesn't seem to feel that way. Why can Marcus Freeman not have a ceiling and Brian Kelly can?
Yeah, that's a very astute observation. What I would say is accurate so far. Look, I think they're two guys in two different positions of their career, first and foremost, right? Brian Kelly's going to be entering his 32nd year as a head coach, and Marcus Freeman's going to be entering his first. Brian Kelly it's easy to forget right now, but when he took over in 2010, this was a broken program, right? The question wasn't, why can't Notre Dame win a national championship? It was kind of like what Nebraska is now, right? It was, will they ever be relevant again? Will they ever be competitive on the field again? And he answered that in the affirmative. He made 2 college football playoffs, played for another national championship in the BCS era against Alabama. Obviously, his Jimmies and Joes were not up to par with the Jimmies and Joes of Alabama, Clemson, and all the other teams we traditionally have seen win the national championship year after year in this era. But I do think there was a sense of, he built this program. He probably personally thought he had taken it as far as he can take it. He probably, at the age of 60, needed a rejuvenation himself. 12 years anywhere is a long time, especially at a job that's a pressure cooker like Notre Dame is. But when you bring in a 36-year-old like Marcus Freeman, who already has a reputation for being a tremendous recruiter, and you have a program that's coming off a New Year's Six appearance and a college football playoff appearance the year before that, I mean, no one's really missing Brian Kelly at Notre Dame right now because of the Marcus Freeman excitement, but they're definitely indebted to him for what he did building that program and putting it into a position where you have a new head coach there who genuinely believes he can come in and take this place to another level. Most of the groundwork has already been laid. It's a matter of getting more talented players in there. And I think that only happens with collaboration across the athletic department and campus. And that only happens, I think, when everyone is up for it and when there's a lot of energy and there's new voices and there's new faces. And, Brian Kelly, for better or for worse, was kind of set in his own ways there. He was not, by any stretch of the imagination, a relentless recruiter, at least compared to some of the peers he'll be going up against in the SEC every year. And that's been the complete opposite of Marcus Freeman, really, from the time he got to Cincinnati. This guy has been known as a tremendous recruiter. He's approached Notre Dame as a place that can get you entry into a lot of places and into discussions in a lot of places based on their brand and their history, as opposed to what it was viewed as under the understaff, which is, hey, our hands are tied. We can only take X number of top 100 players every year because of our academic requirements. So I think he's much more open into going after the best player than seeing if that player is a fit for Notre Dame and choosing whether or not to move forward. Whereas before, I think there was a bit of an outright dismissal and a bit of a labeling as far as these are Notre Dame guys, these aren't Notre Dame guys. And as we've seen, they've run a damn good program doing it the way they have the last 10 or 12 years. But there's still another level that they need to get to if they hope to bring home a national championship.
Matt, you and Brody Miller had a piece a few days ago on the whole Jimbo Saban dust up or disagreement, whatever you want to call it. You obviously talked to a few people. What was kind of the the prevailing theme, or maybe what is something that stood out to you in talking to others about that little exchange between Saban and Fisher?
You framed that as delicately and as nicely as I think anyone has in the week since it happened. It was enlightening. These are two guys who have been around the block, who have worked with a lot of people, and a lot of whom we were fortunate enough to speak to last week. And I think I wrote a separate piece on this week on kind of how there have been so many mentor-mentee relationships among the coaching ranks that fall apart once those guys become competitors, and this one is no different in that regard. I think when you've got two type A personalities going at it, whether it's on the same staff or against each other in the same conference, that's obviously going to breed resentment. I think what was unique in this case is talking to people from that time at LSU, you had a defensive-minded or a head coach with a defensive background in Nick Saban, coaching an offensive coordinator in Jimbo Fisher. And at that time, that was a pretty broken program, LSU. It's easy to forget about right now because they've won 3 titles with 3 different coaches since then. But LSU was in a pretty dark place before Nick Saban got there. He turned them around pretty quickly, and he kicked off a lot of people along the way, as I think we all know. But stories behind the scenes, whether it's Jimbo Fisher, he wants to show his genius. He wants to show off his talent as offense coordinator. Nick Saban, as a defensive guy, as a head coach, is going to limit what the offense is scripted to do in practice because he wants to give his defense the advantage. So there are a bunch of little things like that I think are easy to see build up the resentment level over time. And I think now that they're in the same division, going after the same recruits every year, Jimbo Fisher just beat him on the field last year, the first time Nick Saban had ever lost to a former assistant of his. There's a lot of deep ties there that are really hard to untangle. I was still shocked to hear Nick Saban say what he said because the guy has always been very calculated and strategic and smart in how he chooses to say what he says publicly. He always says stuff with a purpose. I don't think this was something said with any purpose. I think it was a lapse in judgment. I think the fact that he went on Sirius the next day and essentially apologized for it shows that it was a lapse in judgment. And Jimbo Fisher has kind of just been in one of those moods ever since signing day, right? He's been getting a lot of questions about how this class came together. And that has really frustrated him, rightly or wrongly. And I think he's almost just waiting for someone to question him so he can go out there and lay out his defense. And boy, did he ever do that a week ago. I mean, that was something I don't know. I can't recall, at least in my lifetime, seeing in this sport from two guys who are absolute power players in the sport, just absolutely going at it publicly against each other. And Jimbo Fisher lobbing some of the accusations directly at Nick Saban that he did.
Yeah, I think Jimbo's been one of those moods, a
little ornery
forever.
Yeah.
That's kind of how he is. But and I don't say that with malice. It's just he's
right.
That's who he is. Matt, you also wrote a piece on Jordan Addison, and I'm kind of curious, kind of tying it back into the one you wrote this week with Bruce. How much do you think athletic departments, fan bases will be mad at coaches? Like Pat Narduzzi lost Jordan Addison out of the blue. It's not really his fault. I mean, he recruited him. I mean, he coached him up. I mean, he coached him to the Bolitnikoff and all that. And then forces outside of his control completely are why Jordan Addison is in at USC right now. How much do you think those kind of things will be held against coaches for? How dare you lose this guy?
Yeah, that's part of the, I don't want to say culture, but the climate right now where I think you're seeing so many people get really burnt out from this business. Now, I understand they're making millions of dollars to coach a child's game fundamentally, and that's a job that anyone wants to do and a lot of people think they can do. But I hate to say it's out of control. I hate to point fingers because I think this is a bill past due when it comes to player empowerment. But there's definitely a 365-day-a-year grind to this that didn't exist before from a recruiting standpoint, because you're not just recruiting high school players, you're recruiting the portal, and in this case, you're recruiting your own roster, and that still isn't enough. I mean, this one, obviously, the profile is huge, right? It's the best receiver in the country. He's leaving the ACC champions to go with USC, a blue blood that looks like it's going to be getting back on its feet pretty soon under a new coach in Lincoln Riley. I thought the reaction around the country, both inside and outside the sport, was pretty pretty strong in a way that it isn't always with big time transfers. And I think a lot of that had to do with the timing of it. You go through spring ball, you wrap up spring ball, and you think, all right, that's my roster for next year, right? And Pitt just went through 15 spring practices under the impression that they had the best receiver in the country on the roster, and all of a sudden he's gone. And there's very little they can do about it. Is there anything in hindsight Pat Narduzzi could have done? I don't know. I think if you take a step back and look at Kenny Pickett, the guy who threw him those balls, just got drafted in the first round by the Steelers. Brennan Marion, his position coach at Pitt, left for a better paying job at Texas. Mark Whipple, his offense coordinator at Pitt, left for Nebraska, and presumably more money there as well. I mean, from a human level, it's easy to put yourself in Jordan Addison's shoes and say, everyone else is making money off this season. Why aren't I? That said, I don't know the specifics of the transfer to USC. I know that a lot has been implied. I know accusations have been lobbied from Pittsburgh in USC's direction, but unless you can prove tampering, which I don't think you can really prove, right? I mean, there are tampering rules in every sport, every professional sport, and rarely do we ever see them get enforced because it's usually players recruiting other players through back channels. I don't know what can be done in that regard. The timing is really tough if you're Pittsburgh.
Matt Fortuna of The Athletic. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. Always great to have you.
Thank you.
It's Matt Fortuna of The Athletic, one of the great subscription sites. I think we all have it, and you can always get a deal.
Yeah, they do a good job. I mean, it's interesting to see kind of almost coaching carousel talk, 3-4 months before the season even starts, but that kind of is where we are. And, that is an off-season topic, obviously, but it was interesting to see of the Big 12 schools mentioned, just those two jobs, West Virginia with Neil Brown, which I don't think comes as much of a surprise, and then what was the other one? Iowa State with Matt Campbell. The longer Iowa State can hold on to him, the better for the Big 12, in my opinion. Certainly the better for the Cyclones. And I'm glad I didn't put any money in Vegas on how long his tenure would be, because I think everybody would be out of money at this point, except for the most diehard Cyclones fans. But for how long would you be willing to put another 5-year bet on it? I wouldn't.
No.
But for all we know, he could be there in 5 years. I mean, at this point, that would be shocking in some ways, but. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a guy you have to look at, not on a hot seat, but on a win if he'll ever go somewhere. But Neil Brown's certainly on the hottest of the seats when it comes to current Big 12 coaches. He's